All right. All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's SACOG meeting. I want to thank everybody for being here today, and for those that came a little bit early for the Color of Law book discussion. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But will everybody please rise and join me in the pledge? Will Director Frost, will you lead us in the pledge today?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we have, again, quite the robust agenda. So we will see, and I know we have one item that's going to probably take up the majority of time. So I'm going to try to allocate as much time to item 10, which I think what we'll need. So we may be bouncing around a little bit here as we move forward. So bear with me on that. So with that, can we have roll call, please?
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. And just before we get started, just a reminder for our board members, the microphone's in front of you. You can press the button when it's green. You are going over the system online and being streamed, and we're able to hear you better in the room. You shouldn't have to pick it up towards your mouth, but you do want to move it closer to you. Thank you. I'll go ahead and take roll call. Director Baines?
Present.
Bradford?
Here.
Branscombe?
Yes.
Houlihan?
Here.
McCauley for Burris? Here. Patman?
Here.
Desmond? Dowden Calvillo? Frost? Gallardo? Here. Gog?
Yes.
Guerrero? Here. Harris?
Here.
Howdesheld absent. Hume?
Here.
Jennings?
Here.
Joyner?
Here.
Jones? Nisley? Kozlowski?
Here.
Lauren absent. Lozano?
Here.
Sander? Absent. Schaefer?
Here.
Teeter? Thomas absent. Vane? Here. Vega? Here. Villegas absent. Vice Chair Soon?
Here.
Chair Saragosa? And ex officio member Aceves absent. Thank you.
Chair Saragosa, if I could just, Directors Villegas and Lauren are not here because they're in Orange County, at the California Transportation Commission meeting, spending the day there and trying to make sure that we get funding, full funding for the YOLO 80 Causeway project. So I know they wanted to be here. They might join us on Zoom, but just want to let you know they're doing important work.
All right, as well as Casey. So
As well as Casey and a few others.
yes. All right, moving along, we will move to public communications. This is the time for anyone who wishes to address the board on an item that does not appear elsewhere on the agenda. And I do believe I have a couple here in front of me. So Robin Davis. Good morning.
Hello, good morning. I'm Robin and I live in my 160 square foot semi-off-grid tiny home on wheels on my undeveloped residential property in the city of West Sacramento. As many of you I'm sure heard, Governor Gavin Newsom announced the revised 2024-25 budget proposal and plans to cut the homeless housing assistance and prevention program. San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria, who chairs the Big City Mayors Coalition, said California's homeless problem will only get worse when this program is cut. This program started in 2019 and has issued to local governments $3.95 billion so far over the last 5 years. Last year, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development tallied from the point-in-time count reports over 180,000 unhoused Californians, 28% of the nation's total homeless population. That's up nearly 40% from 5 years ago, which is around the same amount of time this program has been running. Governor Gavin Newsom also has plans to revise our RHNA numbers to include our unhoused population in the calculation, so changes are coming in terms of showing your capacity for housing. I also wanted to share that the Supreme Court just ruled that impact fees are unconstitutional if they are not proportionate to the actual impact of the specific project. This is a big win for the people and for all housing project types, a long overdue recognition since fewer homes have been built in the 2010s than in any other decade since the 1960s, largely due to these increasing fees. Housing should not be viewed as an impact, but rather an absolute benefit and added value to a community that should be given every opportunity to thrive. We're going to see more and more opposition to impact fees at the state level due to this Supreme Court case win, the increased liability, and the arbitrary nature these fees hold. West Sacramento is expanding their impact fee reduction pilot program to include residential properties in certain areas. So that's a step in the right direction the region should be going to. Sacramento Regional Sewer Board also requested staff look into a separate impact fee or waiver for tiny homes, and how we define tiny homes is under 400 square feet. So when looking for ways to incentivize affordable housing, you should be looking at how to scale or waive your impact fees. Based on all this data, lack of future funding from the state, and Supreme Court case decisions being made, you have an obligation to the people to allow every possible avenue to house themselves. So I look forward to this region getting innovative about adding roofs, not tents, to our neighborhoods by approving a tiny home on wheels ordinance in your city. The city of West Sacramento will have a draft ordinance coming to council this spring for your reference. And I'd also like to request if we can have validated parking options for public to attend these meetings so that it is as accessible as possible and free for the public to attend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Next is Michael Barman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the SACOG Board. Michael Barnbaum. Wanted to let the SACOG Board know of an upcoming event, and in consideration that the board won't meet here again until approximately August 15th. The event I want to tell you about is on August 29th, and it is the kickoff of the 2024 Sacramento State football season. And this game, using one of our most prized transportation assets, will be utilizing the Capitol Corridor service, as the game will be played against the San Jose State Spartans at Citizens First Credit Union Stadium on the campus of San Jose State. This is a great opportunity to utilize a great traffic-free, hassle-free transportation service as a great alternative to Interstates 80, 680, and 880 between Placer County and Santa Clara County via Sacramento and Yolo County. There are several trips per day that the Capitol Corridor JPA offers between Placer, Sacramento, Yolo, and Santa Clara County. And the service is going to grow back to pre-pandemic levels more or less at the start of calendar year 2025, as that is in their business plan. So I wanted to let everybody know about that. Again, that the kickoff is Thursday, August 29th, on the campus of San Jose State. And then at the meeting coming up in August, just a little teaser for you to think about in the next 3 months. I will be coming back to you and letting you know about the second game and use of the San Joaquin corridor in due time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for the information. All right, any other public comments? Seeing none.
Chair Saragosa, sorry.
Yes,
I did receive a comment via
Okay.
email that I've been asked to read into the record.
all right,
If I can do that now.
absolutely.
Thank you. This is from Glenn Mendelkorn, a citizen. He says, Dear SACOG Board of Directors, hopefully your breakfast meeting went well reviewing the color of law. I'm grateful to Transportation Committee Vice Chair Jesse Lauren, who spoke about it on April 4th. Yes, it covers unpleasant history. It makes readers wonder, how can we correct these wrongs? Moreover, author Richard Rothstein himself now yearns in writing the sequel, What Do We Do About It? He explains, I'm having a great deal of difficulty figuring out how you write a policy book for a general audience. Minneapolis Foundation conversation. Well, maybe we can cultivate examples for him to consider purposely embracing color. As a person of color, I frequently tell people that I'm only Cuban of rice and beans. I'm made. Mine are black. And in the diverse Sacramento area, we have several colors to showcase proudly, especially in transportation. Soon have new Siemens S700 cars dashing smoothly on SAC-RT light rail. So to rectify beyond redlining, we can promote neighborhood travel through blue lining, gold lining, and green lining. And as Deputy Director Casey Lazan and I observed at the SACOG booth in Citrus Heights on Sunday, May 5th, your logo was welcoming with its bright colors. Yes, we cheerfully spotted these at the Arcade Cripple Creek Trail festivities amidst blue skies. Ms. Lazan also spoke of great strides in the Franklin Boulevard zones in a recent Solving Sacramento podcast. After years of Highway 99 bisecting people from economic opportunities, green dollars now flow among vibrant businesses. Air quality improvements are planned through verdant tree canopies with bonus aromas of chili verde. So as we digest the color of law, I expressly hope you each discover and offer your communities forms of regional personal color therapy and innovations. And that concludes his comment.
All right, thank you, Lynette. Okay, we're gonna continue on here, and we do have a new agenda item, and I wanted to have Mr. Mauer explain the intent of this new item.
Thank you, Chair. So we've put an item on, and some other agencies do this, just to do conflict of interest disclosures at the beginning. So this would just be for any of the board members to take a look at the agenda and just see if there's any financial interest you might have, or particularly this year, any campaign donors who might have a contract or entitlement coming before SACOG, because that would require conflicting out. And so this is just an opportunity to say, I'm going to have to conflict out on item, whatever it may be. If that's the case, we obviously don't see a lot of conflicts here at SACOG, but we thought this would be a good way to ensure we disclose these ahead of times and don't have to go back and redo any sort of action that might be taken or have any issues like that. So it's just here for your convenience. It'll be something we can move. I won't make this speech every month. It'll be something we can move through quickly in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mauer. So the board can quickly look through the agenda and note if they have any potential conflicts of interest, and if so, is there anything that needs to be disclosed? All right, I'm seeing none. So we'll go ahead and move forward. And we're going to adjourn as the SACOG Board of Directors and reconvene as the Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for freeways and expressways, also known as CVR Safe. And we will go ahead and, Lynette, do we have any changes in the roll?
No changes to roll call.
Okay, then we will go ahead and I will turn this over to Ms. Von Bechtold.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Barbara Von Bechtold. I'm the program manager for the CVR Safe. So before you today, we have an item for the draft CVR Safe budget for the fiscal year 24-25 to release it for public review and comment. So we've put together this budget. It covers the CVR Safe area, which is El Dorado, Sacramento, San Joaquin, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. The revenues for the safe actually come from a $1 fee that's assessed to the time of each vehicle registration in those 6 counties that make up the safe. So the attached budget shows estimated costs for operations and maintenance of the core call box system, enhanced services and projects like freeway service patrol, intelligent transportation systems, the 511 system, transportation demand management, and our big data project. The safe bylaws require that we have a budget approved before July 1st of each fiscal year. So we're putting out this draft so the public can comment and you all can review it before we plan to come back to you in June for final action. So just today, we're asking that the CVR Safe board approve the release of the draft fiscal year 24-25 CVR Safe budget for review and comment. Again, with final adoption, we're going to come back in June to talk to all of you about it again. If you have any questions, I can do my best to answer those.
Thank you, Barbara. Any questions? Seeing no questions, do we have any public comments?
There's no public comment.
All right, we'll close public comments, bring it back to the board for further discussion or motion.
Through the chair, move to approve.
Thank you. Bradford.
Second, sorry.
Thank you. We have a first and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you. And, I already made a mistake and went out of order here. So we have the consent item for CVR Safe. Is there any member of the public that wishes to make a comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. Is there any questions on the consent item?
Chair, this
Yes.
is Director Hume. I'd like to abstain from the first item on consent as I was not at the April 18th meeting.
Understood. Thank you, Director. Okay, I will entertain a motion on this item. Thank you. We have a first and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you. All right, we will adjourn as CVR Safe and re-adjourn as the SACOG Board of Directors and go to our next item, which is a presentation from Beale Air Force Base. And we have Commander Jeffrey Church with us, and I believe in Vice Commander James Bartran here as well. So welcome our guests this morning.
Good morning, Chairman, SACOG Board of Directors. Thank you very much for allowing us to just come and let you know what's happening about an hour north, right? It took me an hour and 7 minutes to get here this morning, so, it wasn't too terrible. That was nice. So my name is Mako Church. I am both the commander of the 9th Reconnaissance Wing at Beale Air Force Base, as well as the installation commander. And so for you guys, that really doesn't mean a ton, right? But in military-wise, that's important. So what you see here is, right, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what we're doing at Beale right now. And then, where she kind of sits and what we're doing and where we're going, and then the impact, if you will, right, that we're having on the local community from a DoD perspective. Okay. Yeah, that's my mugshot in the top left. My command chief is below me. Unfortunately, she retires tomorrow, right, in Texas. So that'll be awesome for her. Okay. The bottom line of this, right, of this slide, we use this, if you will, as we educate our population as well as the folks that come to the base. We've got about 7,000 humans that work on the base every day. We cover 23,000 contiguous acres in Yuba County. And the economic impact that we're driving, if you will, is about $1.2 billion, right, into the economy. With those 7,000 humans, right, we set up a global, right, we are deployed globally from the wing. We have folks, of course, at Beale, we have folks down south at Edwards. And then as you can see in the middle of the slide, what you have is we have folks in England, we have folks in the Middle East, or very close to the Middle East, i.e. in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have folks in Korea, and then we also have folks in Anderson Air Force Base in Guam. I would tell you that, right, the sun never sets on, right, a 9RW asset, if you will, because we have an airplane airborne, right, across the globe, 24/7, 365 days out of the year. With that, on the right side, we've got some significant partners, right, that are truly, right, citizens first, and then, right, military members second. We've got a air refueling wing, a Air Force Reserve Command air refueling wing. It's the 940th. Their headquarters is also at Beale. They fly KC-135s. In addition, we have the California Air National Guard, which is the 195th wing. They do a bunch of space, cyber, intel, and command and control type things across the entire state of California, but their headquarters is there at Beale. And then, of course, we've got one of our largest tenants that provides intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance information, primarily through the processing, exploitation, and dissemination of data to the globe, right, for our decision makers in order to be able to make appropriate decisions. And then lastly, I'm not going to tell you that they're my favorite tenant, but they are definitely up there, right? It is the 7th Space Warfare Squadron. So we've also got a squadron of Guardians on the base. If you've ever been to Beale, and I know some of the board members have been, it's the cheese wedge that's on the hill. That's what I like to call it. Effectively, it's also the Santa tracker, right? So if you have kids and, right, you want to come up, like, I mean, it is epic. It is a great time. They decorate the whole inside of it for Christmas, right? And, your kids can actually talk to Santa Claus. Like, it's really cool. Like, there are, I see people in here that are about my age, if not slightly more mature, if you will. And right, we remember when like NORAD would track Santa Claus, right? And it would come out on the TV, right? Well, that Santa tracker up there does the exact same thing. Like it's awesome. It's epic. So if you're ever around on Christmas Eve, come on out, right? We'll, get everybody up there and you guys will have a great time. You can actually talk to Santa. Like it's truly awesome. Like it's great. I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, right? So like, they think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Anyway, I bring up the Guardians only because, right, we will have more Guardians that will show up at the base here I say momentarily, probably in about another year and a half. Where we live, right? So this is a heat map, right? I think we've left all these slides with you guys so that you guys can have them. While we live, the base itself, the 23,000 contiguous acres is, sitting in the heart of Yuba County. Right. About 65% of the population that lives at Beale actually lives in Placer, Sutter, and Sacramento counties, if you will. So we drive, right, a lot of benefit right down into the area. It's funny, you will have people that will tell you about Beale that will say that Beale is a donut, right? And so like Beale itself is the center of the donut, right? Like the donut hole. But if you draw the circle, you put the donut down around Beale, and it's a 30-mile circle. That's essentially where, right, everybody lives, 30 to 45 miles all the way around, both north, south, east, and west, if you will. Okay. As far as our impact, what you're looking at here, this is just simply a Yuba County and a Placer County one. I'll have one for the SACOG area in a minute as we get through. But the thing that I want to draw your attention to, right, is that our economic impact is actually technically higher on Placer County than it is on Yuba County, if you will. Right, for a total economic output, if you will, of about $874 million a year. Right, and then you can see the state and total taxes down in the bottom left. And in Placer County, it's actually, right, about $155 million a year that, right, our service members are paying back into taxes in there. And in Yuba County, it's slightly over about $100 million. And then for the entire SACOG area, right, like I said, that economic impact in 24 is about $1.2 billion. Is what it's going to look like. In 25, 26, and 27, those are all forecasts based upon what's happening. However, I will tell you, I think those forecasts are actually going to end up going up based upon the amount of construction that we have ongoing on the base. And you can see, right, in FY24, it's about 225-ish million dollars of tax revenue coming into the SACOG region. And so the last thing I'll leave you with, right, is that some people may have heard that, either the Air Force is or is not going to retire the U-2, but Beale isn't going away. DOD, we have a tendency to do a lot of dumb things sometimes, right? But other times we do, what we don't actually do is invest millions and billions of dollars in infrastructure in a base and then shut it down, right? At least not stateside, right? We might do it overseas, but right, we don't do it stateside. So the first one is the building 2145. It says estimated award is in May of 24. It was actually awarded yesterday. So that construction will start here in about 3 months. Right, it's a renovation to a building that we already have out there at Beale, but that truly will end up being the future of Beale Air Force Base, what goes into that building. The next one is the Multi-Domain Operations Center, which we're trying to get across the finish line with the Congress right now. And we've got great support from Congressman LaMalfa as well as Congressman Garamendi to get that one across the finish line. That truly becomes the foundation and benchmark, that multi-domain operations complex. It is going to be sitting right there on the runway, if you will. That will be the future of where we are going at Beale Air Force Base from a intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance perspective. We are also trying to establish in the next 2 to 3 years this thing called a long-range kill chain operation. I can talk offline about China and things of that nature about what we're doing with the national security strategy, but that building is hugely important. And then Dock 11 is currently under construction, and that was about another $142 million, right, that was awarded back in March of 23. We've taken down 2 old docks, think hangars, right, where we used to put the U-2s out by the tower. That's been completely ripped down, and then we're building 2 state-of-the-art facilities that we can house essentially 5 U-2s in the bottom of that one, and we can put 4 U-2s in the bottom of the multi-domain operations complex. And that's just really real estate for us to be able to use for anything and everything that might come to Beale in the future. And so with that, I know I don't want to time bust, right, everybody on the presentation. Do you guys have any questions for what's happening at Beale?
Thank you, Commander. Any questions? Yes, Director Frost.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question relating to the comment really, regarding the sun never setting and your collaborative, bases or, efforts with partners
Yes,
around
ma'am.
the world. Is that, something specific to you at Beal, or do all the bases in California have different collaborative partners, worldwide?
So all of the, I'm not going to say all of the installations in California because I can't speak on behalf of all the installations. I know Travis, right? At Travis, they have a lot of airplanes flying around the globe nonstop. But we are a unique organization. It's our wing as well as the 55th wing at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, right? That actually have forward-based units in around the globe to maintain the what we would call it would be a low density, high demand assets, right? We've only got 31, 32 U2s on the planet. And we push them out into the other theaters across the globe, right? So that we can continue to provide that intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance for the nation.
And that's specific to you.
Yes, ma'am.
In your center of operation.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And different ones have different types of centers of operations.
Some do. It really depends on what type of wing it actually is. And the Air Force is going through a significant transition right now that would both bore you as well as completely time bust this presentation. However, right, if, right, I'm a fighter pilot by trade, right? I've flown God's gift to aviation for a really long time. That's the F-22. And, right, take the first fighter wing as an example at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. They don't have overseas missions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They just, when it's time for them to go, they deploy to a spot for 4 to 6 months to a year, right? And they stay there and they execute and then they come home, right? But we have a permanent presence at all of these locations that I talked about.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yes, ma'am.
That deal was so big. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Sure. Thank you. Whenever I address
Hello,
public
Mayor.
gatherings in my community, Marysville, Yuba County, I always make a point of noting the happy confluence of outstanding senior executives we have at all of our public institutions. The Water Agency, Yuba County, Marysville, the school district, Beale Air Force Base. I've been privileged to have a glimpse of Colonel Church, call sign Mako, in his formal role and with his family and what have you. We've been very fortunate, and we are very fortunate to have Colonel Church in our community. Sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
So, what could we do to open up the Schneider Gate? And just going back to, you mentioned the donut and the 30 or 40 mile radius
Yes, sir.
around the Beale Air Force Base. I do not believe that Yuba City or Sutter County generally receive any benefit from the economic development, or sorry, the economic impact from Beale right now, ever since that Schneider Gate's been closed.
Our challenge with the Schneider Gate, sir, is, well, currently, it is currently open. That's great. The challenge that we have with the Schneider Gate is that my defenders who man the gate, so part of the challenge that you have, and I'll go into a slightly longer discussion. Many of your installations have contracted security forces personnel. Think that's our version of cops, right? In order to man the gates. Because our defenders are responsible for air-based defense. And we're going to deploy those defenders, right? They're truly not responsible for just sitting on the gate and making sure everybody's safe, right, coming in. The challenge that we have at Beale is that we can hire a civilian employee, i.e. a government civilian, to come in and be, right, to do that duty. But as soon as they're in the government civilian position, then they move to Travis, where the locality pay due to OPM guidelines is 40% higher. So they actually get a 40% pay bump, and they will literally live in the same spot. They just, instead of driving right north to Beale, they drive west to Travis. On the active duty side, our challenge ends up being my Defender squadron at the moment, right, is manned at 72%-ish, And then when you add in the do not arm roster that we have for a myriad of different reasons, right, we're actually at 55% manning. So with 55% manning, I cannot maintain and keep open all 5 gates. I get the same complaint or concern, right, from my members and all the retirees. It's about 30,000 retirees that live around the area, right, that are frustrated that the Grass Valley Gate isn't open more, right? Because we are also the only installation in Air Combat Command that has 5 gates based upon where everybody lives.
Sorry, don't mean to take up a lot of time, but having just went to San Antonio and talking to the airmen and the folks there, the 16th Air Force, I mean, that we being Sutter County and Yuba City have been kind of at a disadvantage to welcoming them, thanking them. I mean, we see someone in uniform, we're thankful for all that you do, want to welcome you in the community, salute you, but we're not seeing that. I mean, everybody's going out the Wheatland Gate, therefore you're gonna see all that economic impact in Placer, right? And in Sacramento, but we're not seeing that. And so just humble request, see what you do to open up Schneider.
Yes, sir. We will continue to work on it. If we get back to 100% manning, right, we can keep the Schneider Gate open. But until we do, right, we have to make that decision based upon where the majority of our population lives, or where our active duty population lives.
Thank you. Yes, Director.
Mr. Chairman, just really quickly, thank you so much for your presentation. I appreciate it very much, and thank you for your service, and thank you to all the women and men that are out there at the base for their service as well. We are very appreciative. Just wondering how we can schedule a tour of the base. Is that something that we're able to do?
100%, ma'am. What are you doing Saturday? On Saturday, the base is open.
Oh, okay.
For about 5 hours. We're hosting an auto expo on Saturday. We've got about 550 cars and about 17 vintage airplanes that'll be there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so you're welcome to come out on Saturday, or, right, you can send it, work it through me, work it through our public affairs team, and we'll be more than happy to bring any and everybody out to the base to show you guys what we do.
If maybe you could leave your contact information with staff so that we can pick that up, we'd really appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am, will do.
Thank you.
Yes.
At least you're not building something in order to close the base, which is good, because I've been through a base closure as far as McClellan, and I'm retired from the Travis 60th Aerial Port Squadron Carpenter Shop. Thought I'd make that comment.
Yes, we have no intention of closing Beale Air Force Base.
Yeah, so Chair, Colonel Church, just want to thank you so much for coming today and sharing a little bit about the base with the region. Also, I think my fellow board members probably had an opportunity to read about it in James's email monthly update, but a couple weeks ago, SACOG leadership and some of the board leadership was able to take a tour at Beale. I know you weren't available, unfortunately, but Colonel Bartran did an excellent job hosting that for us, and so I wanted to say thank you to him as well. I think it really conveyed that tour, plus the presentation today really does a great job conveying the importance of the base to the regional economy, but in addition to our national security. And I know you didn't touch quite as much on that today. I know you were limited on time, but certainly on the tour, we heard about the tremendous asset that Beale is to our nation. And I think it was very important. And it's important as this board, makes decisions with respect to housing and transportation, that we keep in mind what an asset Beale is to the region and the nation. So.
Thanks, sir.
Colonel Church, I would just want to build on Director Bradford's comments. I was part of that tour as well, and wanted to commend your staff for their hospitality, but also what they're doing to manage your base, the lands on that base, in a very sustainable way. We got to learn about all that you're doing out there for the environment as well. And learning about Space Force was very fun. So.
Did you see the 2,500 cows that we have on the base?
We did see the
Yeah.
cows. Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
Yes, Director Jones.
Yes, I'd like to share a few comments with everybody regarding Beale Air Force Base. I don't know if many of you know, but my husband is retired Army, so we shop quite frequently at the PX and the commissary up at Beale, as well as my dad was retired Air Force, so I'm familiar with a life of service in the military. So I just wanted to share some points about Beale with everyone. Solano County and the MTC support Travis Air Force Base in the Bay Area by ensuring that it has adequate infrastructure to support that important base. Sandag in San Diego supports its bases, and RTC Southern Nevada supports the mission of Nellis Air Force Base. Beale Air Force Base has been part of the Sacramento region since around the 1950s. Is located outside of the core of the region as it is a major air base, not conducive to an urban location. Beale Air Force Base represents over 9,000 civilians and military living wage jobs in the Sacramento region and is growing. The 2050 blueprint data online needs to reflect correct numbers for that existing and projected employment. Many of those employed at Beale live in Placer County, supporting families and the economy of Placer County, as you said, $155 million in state and local taxes. Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am.
Beale staff are a vital part of our entire region, and we must support them. We must support safe access to Beale Air Force Base for those employees and vendors at Beale to protect its vital mission to protect our nation. We have to do the same at SACOG with our last remaining military installation in the Sacramento region. And I will say my husband was stationed at the Army Depot in Sacramento, which was one that got caught by BRAC. My dad served at Mather, which was one caught by BRAC. And so have a true appreciation of appreciating and taking care of our armed forces. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Director. Yes, Director Teeter.
Thank you for that tour that we did. I will say it's a dream come true to go into Pave Paul's. I know it's a different name now, but being able to see that in person was amazing. And I think it was mentioned that you guys have no intention of expanding housing on the base. It will be offsite housing in our communities in the future.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Director Guyot.
Also, thank you for your service. We're most appreciative. I really appreciated it, and I'm sure my Placer County co-chairs here, the information that you gave us. I knew about how many folks, seems like there were a lot in our area, but I didn't know the numbers. So I really appreciate that information. And definitely, I'm sorry I missed this last tour, but I will get that opportunity to get to the next one.
We'll do it again.
But I also did, hearing my partner from Yuba City area, I can understand they're probably the most impacted. So to have, I think that's a little bit jarring to see those numbers on the impact, to say the folks that are definitely impacted. So I know you're doing it all, but anything that you can to help them with that access, I think that's crucial. And as the proud aunt of 5 FA-18 pilots out of Lemoore, I would probably argue over what's the coolest plane.
Oh, man, we can take that offline. I've fought the Hornet many times, and I'll just leave it there.
All right, any other comments? All right, seeing none. Colonel, thank you so much for coming out to us this morning. I missed the tour, so Director Dowden Cabillo, we will definitely look into do it again. I want to do all the cool things that you all did as well, though, so I have to make sure we get a good group together to come see you. But again, thank you for your service first and foremost, and thank you again for being here this morning.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, we will proceed ahead with the consent calendar. These items are intended to be approved in one motion. However, anyone can remove an item for separate discussion. Is there a director that would like to remove an item from the consent calendar? All right, seeing none. Madam Clerk, we do have is there anyone from the public who wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar? And I do have item 5 from Michael Barnbaum to be removed. So we'll do that for a longer conversation. Is there any other public comments on the consent calendar?
No other comments on the consent calendar other than the item 5, as you noted.
All right, so aside from moving item 5 off for a discussion, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move approval of the consent agenda as amended.
Thank you. Who got the second? Director Hume?
It was over here somewhere. I was.
Lockberg? Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to note again,
Oh,
my
yes.
abstention on item 1 for the approval of minutes as I was not at that meeting.
Understood. Thank you, Director. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes, and we will take up consent item number 5, which is approval of the regional transit network.
Hi, good morning, directors. So Regional Transit Network, we took this item to the Transportation Committee, had a very good discussion. There's about 47 corridors that we've identified in the region. It's a 6-county effort to look at high capacity transit, which could be BRT. It could also be things just like transit signal priority, things to help make our transit move faster and quicker throughout the region. We also have 6 corridors that have been identified for near-term improvements, which are corridors that we think are really close to being ready to have high-capacity transit in some degree across the region. We've worked with our transit agencies across the entire 6 counties to come up with a plan that works. We've gotten a lot of support for this from our partners across the region. And we actually are going to be submitting, I think, a SMART grant, which has to do with ITS type improvements to help move some of those near-term corridors forward. So we're really excited about the movement on this project and everything that we've done to get to this point. So happy to answer any questions if you have any on this, or take comment and questions from the public.
Great, thank you, Christina. Do we have any questions? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and open up public comment. Michael, come on up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Michael Barnbaum, and I want to speak specific to this item and provide a friendly amendment and to add a 7th priority corridor to the list you have there of 6 for your consideration and approval. And that is that of the Watt Avenue corridor. And I want to emphasize the use of regional in this presentation versus local. The Watt Avenue corridor in its entirety is a regional corridor. If you consider that from north to south, it is Santucci Boulevard, Watt Avenue, South Watt Avenue, and Elk Grove Florin Road. When you look at it in that perspective and that angle, the corridor covers in unincorporated areas of 2 counties, along with 2 incorporated cities, and nearly touching a 3rd incorporated city at the intersection of Watt Avenue and Folsom Boulevard. It is a heavily congested corridor. If you were to travel by train from downtown Sacramento to historic downtown Folsom, you can look not so much over the bridge over troubled water with Simon and Garfunkel, but you would actually look at the bridge over troubled Watt Avenue getting into the Manlove station and look over it, and it's a horrendously congested, trafficked corridor. A high capacity transit service, whomever the transit operator or operators would be a significant investment of transportation dollars and transit dollars to this regional corridor that would really help toward relieving congestion, especially if it was marketed, advertised, and promoted in a way that people got the message out among various communication methods, from social media, sponsored posts,
30 seconds.
traditional television media posts, word of mouth, and even advertisement and promotion on radio stations in town too. So yes, the item is great, but I'd like to propose the friendly amendment to include this corridor for your approval. Thank you very much. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. We discussed this at length in the Transportation Committee, and Transportation staff always does a terrific job of making the presentations. I'd like to repeat some comments I shared there. And that is, and particularly, and I'm not picking on SAC-RT just as an example, 58 million in SB 125 funds went to SAC-RT, which froze out potential funding for rail and other opportunities. And they're maintaining a network that is very ambitious. And of course, SB 125 said one of its purposes was to maintain those networks. So they're just, we as a staff and they are simply following that direction. But I think there's some real danger lurking in the future when you're $78 billion on the wrong side of zero at the state level, and there may be a change in management in Washington that's less friendly to rapid transit. When you have an organization that's operating up at this level, ridership issues and what have you, and you need all this funding, I think they're heading for a financial cliff once SB 125 runs out. And I don't see any planning, don't hear of any planning to deal with that. It's either they think they're too big to fail, or there's an over-reliance on longer term subsidies for rapid transit. And rapid transit's a good thing, but everything has to live within budgets, and the budget right now, I think the perspective on budget and their demand for funds is, I think, unrealistic in the long term. It's very well managed. They've got a great board, but I think they've got a big problem coming, and we should hear more from them and their similar organizations on how they're going to manage that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Have any questions? Yes, Director Kozlowski.
There's something standing in the way of
Director Kozlowski, if you could use your microphone. Thank you.
My apologies. Is there, I guess to the staff, is there some barrier to including the Watt corridor in the priorities?
Hi, yeah, thanks. That's a good question. So the corridors that were identified were heavily driven by partners themselves. I don't know the detail specific as to why, but I think a lot of it has to do with just current conditions and what we could do with kind of smaller investments to actually make an impact on Watt. So Watt is in the plan. Watt is identified as one of the BRT light, I believe, corridors. We all agree that that is a significant corridor. There's a lot of development that's been happening towards the north. There's a lot of improvements that have been happening towards the south. But as far as the near term, which we're talking about within the next year or two that we want to do these improvements, it just wasn't quite ready enough in the eyes of our agencies to be able to move forward with it for the near term improvements. But it's on the list of projects that are prioritized.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Do we have any other public comments? I know we didn't close it down, so I'll put it back out there.
No other public comment.
All right, we'll go ahead and formally close public comments, bring it back for more discussion or action.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I'd like to propose, with respect to the good suggestion, that we approve the item as presented.
Understood. Thank you. We have a first, have a second by Director Bradford. All right, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. All right, that will close out the consent calendar. And we will move to our action items. And the next one is our Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority appointment. And on this one, as you know, our Chair Emeritus has resigned, and Director Hume has graciously joined the board with us. So again, welcome. But with that, that did create a vacancy on the CARTA board. And so I did talk to the vice chair about this. He's got a little bit of a busy job going on. So he's actually graciously accepted to still continue on in the vice chair role, which led me to kind of have further discussions on that. And so I talked with Director Desmond, who has also graciously put his name forward, and I thought that would be a great suggestion, kind of a like for like change in terms of keeping Sacramento County on that Carter board as well. So that was sort of my thought process on that, and looking for the board to move forward with that. And
I would make that motion before Director Desmond has a chance to change his mind.
Second.
Second by
Right.
James.
There you go. We have a first and a second. You have.
You need a third or a fourth?
There you go. Any questions or comments on this? Seeing none, any public comments?
There's no public comment.
All right, we'll close public comments, bring it back for a motion. We have a motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, congratulations, Director Desmond. All right, we'll go to our next agenda item, which is item 9, which is an approval of the revised board rules, and Mr. Mauer will go summarize this for us.
All right, thank you, Chair. So as the board's aware, SACOG has its JPA agreement, and then it also has its board rules, which are effectively the bylaws that control how we run this meeting and other SACOG business here. And so these board rules used to be updated and reviewed every few years, but they actually haven't been changed since 2005. So we thought it was a good time to take a look at them and do a full review. We've done this over the past, I would say, 6 months or so through the Strategic Planning Committee. So we originally went to Strategic Planning Committee back in December. Then we brought it back to Strategic Planning Committee in February with some suggestions for revisions, received some comments from the committee. And one of the comments we received was maybe we should have a smaller group of the Strategic Planning Committee sit down with me and staff and go through these rules with a fine-tooth comb. So we did that about a month ago, brought it back to Strategic Planning Committee, and then are presenting it here for the board for final approval. So what I will say is there are no major changes. There isn't a major overhaul. It's essentially the same board rules, just with some things that we've either tweaked or things that we've updated to reflect that it's 2024 and not 2005. So there's certain things in there like gendered language that was used in 2005 that we now want to remove for updated board rules. And then other things like we've adopted a strategic plan and a racial equity action plan. So we wanted to align some of the language and some of the references to be consistent with those. As far as substantive changes, for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. We did present a red line that shows the changes. So if there are any specific questions, I'm happy to answer those. One of the things I will point out is one change we did work in there is a procedure for calling a special meeting. So under the Brown Act and under the prior board rules, it allows a majority of the board to call a special meeting, but it's really hard to figure out how to get 16 or 17 of you all to come to some agreement on a special meeting. So the way we've set it up in here is that step 1 would be what you would normally do. You go to the board chair. It's up to the board chair to call a special meeting. If the board chair declines to do that, then there would need to be a critical mass, which I believe we wrote in here is 8, that's less than a quorum. And if that group of board members, less than a quorum being key so that we don't get into a Brown Act discussion, request calling a special meeting, then that request can be made to Lynette. And then Lynette would send a poll out to the board effectively saying, do you want to have a special meeting on this date at this topic? And if a majority says yes, then we call a special meeting. We wanted that to be something that there was a structure to be able to do that. But I also want to be mindful of the fact that, especially with a board of this size, with people coming from different areas and different parts of the regions, it's not ideal to have special meetings. We're certainly not doing this to encourage more special meetings. Just in those unique circumstances where there may be something time sensitive, something of particular importance, we have a mechanism to figure out how to do it. So we've incorporated that in there. The rest of it is really just reflecting, some things like changes in the Brown Act and things like that. So if there are any specific, one thing I forgot to add, I'm sorry. Part of the discussion too is the board stipend is included within the board rules. During initial discussions, we had considered increasing the stipend from 100 to 125. What staff looked at is similar agencies, the board stipend tends to be between anywhere from 80 to 150. So either at 100 or 125, we're within that range. When we brought it back to the Strategic Planning Committee for the final recommendation, their recommendation is to stay at the $100 stipend. I will just say we can make changes to any of these rules by resolution or through the normal process. We don't have to do a 6-month, full review procedure every time we want to make a change. It is something that we can change specific items from time to time. So I just wanted to point out that we had that discussion, but otherwise I'm happy to answer any questions. Approval today would adopt the revised rules and we'd send those out to each of your agencies so that they have a copy.
Thank you, Michael. And yeah, just to reiterate, we did have quite a bit of discussion as strategic planning on this, as well as a little bit of an ad hoc group of that as well, to just kind of go almost we did go line by line through the whole thing to see it. I know there was another spot where the chair used to be able to kind of unilaterally create like ad hoc committees, subcommittees, and that's just too much for, I think, our staff to have to deal with as well. So that now has to come back to the board. It isn't just up to the chair to be able to do that. But I think any of us on strategic planning are happy to answer any questions as well. If any, yes, Director.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the thorough review of our rules. It's important to do that on an occasional basis, although it's been almost 20 years, so it definitely was time. Just curious, as someone who is a follower of parliamentary procedure, in the rules, rule number 5, that references the chair specifically, it does say that the chair may use Rosenberg's rules of orders. And I'm just wondering why we're not using Robert's rules.
So
Mr. Maurer.
I'll answer that for you. So it's intentional that it says may, because, the thought process is if we get too parliamentarian, we could lose something based off of that. So we wanted to have some flexibility for the chair to govern how the rules go. But having something we can reference as a backstop, if there is a dispute as to how the procedure goes, it gives something for the chair basically to point to me to say, we should go in this path. The only reason to use Rosenberg's rules over Robert's rules is it's easier for me to look up, essentially.
Goodness.
So I say that half jokingly, but it's because Robert's rules are more in-depth and Rosenberg's rules are more shortened. And so for something like this, that's a smaller board as opposed to a more, larger, like the assembly or something like that, it can be more effective to have it be a little bit more straightforward than having to go through the Roberts rules and find the specifics. That being said, I'd be happy to change that to Roberts rules if that's the board's.
I like Robert's rules. I know Robert's rules. I was sort of a student of parliamentary procedure decades ago. And so I always push for it because I am very familiar with it. But just was curious as to your rationale. If it's the body's preference to use Rosenberg's, then that's fine. But I do prefer Robert's rules myself. But thank you.
Alice runs a mean meeting. She runs a great meeting. Do we have any other questions? All right, we'll open it up for public comment.
There's no public comment.
All right, we'll bring it back to the board then. Thank you. Further comments or action? All right, thank you.
Second.
All right, we have Vice Chair seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? All right, motion passes. Thank you. All right, we will move on to our information items and to item 10, which is our 2025 Blueprint Land Use Assumptions. And Mr. Miller will be leading this discussion this morning. So thank you, Mr. Miller.
All right. Good morning, members of the board, and thank you for the opportunity to present you all with an update on our Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, or as I'll be referring to it from here on out, the 2025 Blueprint. So my name is Zach Miller, and I'm the program manager for the 2025 Blueprint. So the presentation you'll hear today is going to really focus on the development and the performance of option 3, the complete community scenario that this board directed staff to develop and analyze during the April board meeting. Today, staff is requesting that the board consider option 3, which I'll be presenting here, and then provide staff with direction on how to proceed, keeping in mind that we're targeting June for a board action on adopting a single set of land use assumptions for the plan. So quick agenda here. I'll start out by providing a very high level background on the plan and process and engagement that's been undertaken by staff over the last couple of years. We'll then discuss how option 3, the complete community scenario, was developed by staff with input from the board. And then I'll be detailing where we landed and how we got there as it relates to this option number 3. And finally, I'll be going over some next steps and answering any questions that you may have and seeking your direction moving forward. So just going over this timeline, we've gone over this a few times now, but just want to reiterate it. So this presentation is going to focus on option 3, obviously, and how it stacks up relative to the discussion scenario that you heard about in April. So the first board action item that we'll be bringing you this year as it relates to the 2025 blueprint, land use and transportation assumptions, will be in June, when we're going to be asking the board to adopt a single set of land use assumptions. And this will really allow us to continue the transportation conversation after that over the summer and fall. And then that board will be asked to adopt a final scenario in probably October, November timeframe, which will really solidify the land use and transportation assumptions for the 2025 blueprint. I will note later in this presentation that I'll be presenting you with the potential land use scenarios that could potentially be brought forth for your consideration in June. Then in September, we'll be bringing you a presentation on the draft final scenario. And then wrapping up this year, we'll be asking you to adopt the final scenario in October, November, as I mentioned. So we provided an in-depth review of the process and engagement that's been conducted to date at the last board meeting in April. But as a refresher, we've been working on the development of the 2025 blueprint for a number of years at this point. In the interest of time and to make sure to allow for enough time for questions and answers at the end, I'm not going to go over all these steps that are outlined here in front of you. But if you do have any specific questions on all these steps that have been completed to date or are ongoing, please feel free to ask at the end of the presentation. So as you will recall, last month staff presented to the board an in-depth description of how and review of how the discussion scenario would perform. And that was the board's first real look at a single set of land use assumptions for the plan. So as part of this presentation in April, the board was presented with 2 alternative options to the discussion scenario for revisions to those land use assumptions as we move forward to adopting land use assumptions in June. So the discussion scenario and those 2 alternative scenario options make up the 3 options that you see on the screen here in front of you today. Option 1 is simply the discussion scenario. That's what you learned about in April. Option 2, the prioritizing performance scenario. That was a scenario that was predicated on really VMT performance of developing communities and potential developing communities, and a potential, moving around of units, housing units and jobs in those areas. This land use scenario option was not selected by the board for further analysis. So then we move on to option 3, the complete community scenario. So as detailed in the April board meeting, option 3 would be developed around more complete build out of developing and potential developing communities, but in fewer places. So if you think of it, a consolidation of kind of development in those areas. So this was presented as being accomplished by prioritizing those developing communities that have the strongest likelihood of lower vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, based on pathways analysis, those 3 pathways that were analyzed last year and presented to you, and other factors such as adjacency to existing development and jobs housing balance. The assumption presented during the April board meeting was that this alternative would be comparable to the GHG performance of the discussion scenario, since the total amount of growth in those areas, the developing and potential developing community areas would stay constant at around that, 32% or so for the region as a whole. Then in April, as I had mentioned, this board directed staff to move forward with the development and analysis of option 3, the complete community scenario. And then finally, I want to note that the direction provided by the board to develop and analyze option 3, the complete community scenario, does not lock you into that scenario moving forward. This was being developed as a potential alternative to the discussion scenario, but both of those scenarios are still on the table moving forward. So the feedback and input that staff is looking for today is some additional clarity and direction from the board on the land use options that should be brought back to the board at the June meeting for potential adoption of the land use assumptions. So based on the analysis of option 3, the complete community scenario that you'll hear about today, staff is hoping to receive input on which of the following we should kind of put forth in the June board meeting. So there's a few different paths forward here. So the first one being option 1, the discussion scenario as the only land use scenario we bring forth for adoption. Then secondly, option 3, the complete community scenario being brought forth as the only land use scenario for potential adoption in June. And then the third being bring both scenarios along with a more in-depth comparison and analysis of them to one another. And then from those two options, option 1 and option 3, the board would select one of those in the June meeting. And then I'll be posing this question at the end of the presentation as well to further elicit a response. So I'll now be getting into how option 3, the complete community scenario, was developed. So similar to the approach used for the development of the discussion scenario that you learned about last month, option 3, the complete community scenario, was developed around the following foundational considerations. So 1, achieving the greenhouse gas target as a key regional policy priority. So we wanted to put something in front of you that we think can achieve the greenhouse gas target and ensure the region maintains eligibility for those key state transportation funding programs that we've detailed previously. 2, a scenario that could be feasibly implemented in that it's consistent with local general plans and meets the reasonableness test to ensure assumptions are achievable and acceptable by both state and federal government agencies. So the board will really need to adopt a plan that is feasible to implement. And so that's a necessary condition that staff embedded into this scenario, option 3. In fact, the feasibility is something that we need to demonstrate as part of our sustainable community strategy compliance to the Air Resources Board. Then 3, a scenario that balances policy priorities, such as the board adopted triple bottom line framework. So the assumptions are also optimizing for that triple bottom line policy goals to the extent feasible by solving for performance metrics associated with equity, the environment, and the economy. And then 4th, incorporating local feedback. So SACOG received several local feedback from several local jurisdictions and made adjustments to the assumptions to reflect these comments for option 3. However, there were a couple of more significant requests for shifts that could have jeopardized the ability to achieve the greenhouse gas target. So we did not entirely reflect all these changes in option 3, the complete community strategy that you'll see before you here today. I will note that we have met with or spoken to all of the jurisdictions we received these letters and comments from, and we're going to be providing formal response letters in the coming days to these jurisdictions. So moving into the land use considerations. So back in April, we discussed very comprehensively the land use considerations taken into account for development of the discussion scenario. So you can see a comprehensive list of these considerations along with descriptions of the types of project conditions and their relatively likelihood of resulting in a plan development being included in the 2025 blueprint. And you can see that in Appendix F of your staff packet, as well as in a handout in front of you today. It's that landscape format table, land use considerations in the title. So the same overarching land use considerations were used to form the basis of both the discussion scenario and option 3, the complete communities scenario. So you can see those considerations that staff takes into account on the slide on the screen in front of you as well. As you'll notice, most of these considerations were held constant across both option 1, the discussion scenario, and option 3, the complete communities scenario. And those are where you see the equal sign there. The exceptions to this are those considerations that you see in the final column under option 3 that have the green plus symbol next to them. So for these specific considerations, those being increasing the likelihood of achieving the greenhouse gas target, proximity to job centers, and adjacency to urban footprint, they were all emphasized, and their volume was kind of effectively turned up in how they were considered when developing option 3 land use assumptions, which I'll be going into a bit more depth in here in a minute.
I'm sorry, Chair, can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes.
Would you restate again what those plus marks signified?
Yes, so that means for option 3, we kind of turned up the volume on those and considered those a bit more heavily in the development of option 3. And here in a slide or two, I'll be really honing in on those, how we went about doing that.
Thank you.
All right, so now I'll get into more of the details on how option 3, the complete community scenario, was actually developed. So we started with these kind of guideposts. So as you may recall, at the April board meeting, staff was directed to move forward with the development and analysis of option 3, which was stated as having several key objectives that included maintaining comparable GHG performance to that of the discussion scenario. And that would be done by maintaining the total amount of growth in developing community areas. So roughly 1/3 of the total growth forecast through the year 2050. Then secondly, not changing the total number of jobs and housing at the county level relative to the discussion scenario. So the total number of jobs and housing by county remain constant relative to the discussion scenario, of course. And then finally, the regulatory policy and market reasonableness factors and considerations that I touched on earlier, which were applied consistently for the discussion scenario and option 3. So these reasonableness factors that I'm mentioning, so that includes, pipeline project inventory for all projects that have been built since 2020 that are under construction today or going through tentative map level entitlements. It also includes recent permitting trends at the community type level, completed permits happening at a regional level, as well as readiness factors for some of our developing communities to think through how likely a project is to happen based on regulatory and market factors. So then kind of getting back to developing a set of criteria for which we use to develop option 3. So the first criteria was vehicle miles traveled performance. So we used some of the learnings from the pathways exercises, specifically pathway 1, and communities, developing communities, their performance, their VMT performance. That was one specific criteria we use for the kind of reallocation of housing within counties. Jobs housing balance was another. So this is the build out of jobs housing ratio from within each developing community, taken directly from specific plans or from local governmental staff. So a higher jobs housing balance is really indicative of a developing community plan with a higher likelihood of becoming a complete community at build out. Then we have proximity to jobs and destinations. So this metric really measures access to existing 2020, that is, jobs within a 15-minute drive. So this metric attempts to capture how far residents will typically be traveling outside of their communities on trips that are to jobs that are within 15 minutes of their homes. And then lastly, adjacency to the existing urban footprint. So this measure is really the percent of each developing community's perimeter that is adjacent to the existing urban footprint.
Excuse me, Chair. Could we have the OK button clicked so that we remove that?
Oh, in the corner.
We asked about this and we can't.
Sorry.
It just says adjacency there.
Slide it.
Adjacency. Yeah. Okay. So adjacency. So this measure is the percent of each developing community's perimeter that is adjacent to the existing urban footprint. And not performing well in this metric would really indicate potential leapfrog development. And then better performance using this criteria would indicate a more orderly expansion of the existing urban footprint. So staff used these 4 criteria, which you can see on the slide, were already part of the factors considered. As you can see, those arrows pointing to the factors that were considered for the land use assumptions in developing the land use assumptions for the discussion scenario. But we effectively, as I mentioned before, kind of turned up the volume on those 3: the likelihood of achieving the greenhouse gas target, the importance of proximity to job centers, and the adjacency to the existing footprint for development of this option 3, the complete community strategy.
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question. So when you say turn up the volume, are we talking about going from 10 to 11, or are we talking about going from 5 to 10?
We'll get into that more, but just putting more emphasis on it as opposed to some of these other. But we'll get into that in a slide. You'll be able to see exactly how much changed between the 2 scenarios. So now next I'll be getting into where we landed with the consolidation of growth in the developing community areas by county using the criteria I just went over. So the slide, you may not be able to read it readily on the projector here, but it's also in front of you. It was provided as a handout here today. So the orange cells show where the number of jobs or housing units were reduced, and the green cells show where they were increased relative to the discussion scenario. So this reallocation of jobs and housing growth in developing and potential developing communities relative to the discussion scenario was completed using those 4 criteria I described in the last slide. A few things to note here. We made every attempt where possible to consolidate growth from developing communities included in the discussion scenario into fewer developing communities. Although further consolidation is potentially possible, it would be at the expense of reasonableness considerations. So put simply, option 3 as presented today ensures that projects that have already been completed or are under construction or have started grading were not shifted. So after consideration of potential shifts in all 6 counties, option 3 shifts growth only in Placer, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. And this is because of the criteria used for option 3. Staff found that there were not sufficient developing community candidates in the discussion scenario to justify shifts in Yuba, Sutter, and El Dorado County. And much of that was due to those reasonableness factors because.
Director Banks. So sorry, I just have a question regarding Sutter Point. So the infrastructure is being put in right now. The sewer expansion will be completed by the end of the year, and there'll actually be models delivered next year. So given the numbers that you guys are projecting for 2035, like it doesn't show Sutter Point being a part of that in your consideration.
Is that it? Is that in the discussion scenario you're saying that it doesn't, it's not, Center Point's not included?
So for all the directors, we try to give you as much, including the handouts here. If you look at the last page, and I don't have it in front of me right now, I mean, Zach is describing, there really was not enough growth in those three counties. So Sutter, El Dorado, and Yuba to shift. Sutter Point, as you know, Director Baines, is in our current plan and is in the, I think, the complete community scenario. We can talk with you offline about exactly when that's happening. The 2035 is critical, if you remember, because that's our greenhouse gas target horizon year. So.
Yeah, and
So James, in
So
other
going back
words,
to the 2035, I mean, I think the numbers we have would show, it exceeds the 500 homes within the next 3 years.
The request we would make of anybody, and we've been made this for a while, is if you have information, if your staff has information, if the developers have information that we don't have, please bring it forward, right? It is very hard for us to know everything and all the backbone and the financing. So we have requested that, and please keep giving us what you know, okay? And what your developers know and what your staff knows. We've been doing the best we can to get all that information.
Thank you.
And also to clarify, this table that's up on the screen and in front of you, those are just where there were shifts made. There's a 11x17 in portrait style that it's color coded for option 3 that has essentially in orange. Yes, exactly. In orange, those are the communities that were not developing communities not included in option 3, and the ones in green were those that are included in option 3. And that's the kind of comprehensive list for these community types.
Director Lozano.
Yeah, thank you. And I know you may get to some of this in a little bit, but I just have a quick question looking at this item here, that table that was shifted.
Mhm.
I noticed there are a couple of projects on here that are currently under construction and or are ready to go. And they have in option 3, they've been excluded. And if you just go to the housing units difference on the right column, they kind of jump out with -1,500, -1,805. If we were using the metric that we are trying to get shovel-ready projects that are already in development, how do they then get moved completely out?
So
And another project, let's say, that isn't even close to being started, increase.
So are you
In the complete community scenario.
Are you specifically referring to Cordova Hills and Mather South or South Mather?
Yes.
Yes.
And then the Jackson West specific plan gets moved from 0 to 2,000. How does that happen, I guess?
Yeah, so I'll be getting into that a bit more.
Okay.
But I think some of those, like Mather South, I do not believe Mather South has begun construction, and we're taking into account a lot of those factors, the pipeline considerations, as well as the readiness factors, as well as local jurisdiction input to the degree possible at this point. But I think maybe in this next slide, that may get cleared up a bit. If not, you can re-ask that question at the end, and I can get into more depth on that.
No, one more question, Rick.
And just to follow up on that, when you go through it in more detail, I'd like to see about the possibility of is it all or nothing, or what would it, if you split the baby, so to speak, in more realistic ways, if some of it is under construction, right? So what would that look like?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that'll get clarified. That question will be answered here in a minute.
So, Vice Chair Sin and directors, if it's not grading, if it's not physically grading right now, look, you could, keep it coming, right, in terms of questions. For this exercise, given those 4 criteria that we tried to dial up, there actually isn't a lot of difference, frankly. I know there is when you do project by project, and that's and we told you this last month, right? You're gonna have some will come into the plan, others will drop out. But you asked us to look at what would a more complete build out of existing kind of developing communities look like? How would it fare? How would they perform? This is for discussion, for your feedback today, right? And if we had really taken some of the criteria, I believe that you're suggesting, you'd have so little variation, you wouldn't see hardly any change. So this is edification, this is information, right? We did the best we could. But if it was truly physically grading, like it's in, we're not touching that. Everything but we try to use those 4 criteria. That fair, Zach?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And as you can see on this table, in the 2035 timeframe, there was only a total of about 1,250 units that were able to be moved. And this was mostly because of those reasonableness factors that in the 2035 scenario, the discussion scenario, we included a lot of communities that, you know, are under construction. We're seeing rooftops, we're seeing gradings, stuff of that nature. And so there was not much of an ability incorporating those reasonableness factors to move any more units other than those, you know, those 1,250 units for the 2035 scenario. And as you'll see here on this, how this option 3 fared relative to the greenhouse gas target, you can see that it gets us about 0.14% closer to our greenhouse gas reduction target relative to the discussion scenario. So really, to put this into context, this is about the same reduction percentage that the school bus program that we've been talking about in past meetings could potentially get us in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And then just to reiterate, this relatively small percentage decrease is directly tied to the fact that, as I mentioned, our greenhouse gas reduction target is for year 2035 in that time frame, and option 3 only consolidated 1,250 units into more VMT and greenhouse gas efficient areas. So with that, I'd like to open it up to any additional questions you may have at this point. And then also I'd like to request any feedback that you have relative to these 3 pathways forward. Option 1 being the discussion scenario only being brought in June, option 3, complete community scenario only being brought in June, or both being a bit further developed and a comparison of the 2 brought in June.
All right, thank you. And I'm sure there's no questions, so.
Real quickly.
Yes.
He's asking for comment here. In other events, I don't know what the protocol it's established here, but in other boards, public boards, I've seen public comment come before we have to react. Right now, we're reacting only to presentation.
So what we're gonna do is take just questions right now, then we'll have public comment, and then we actually have discussion on the item itself. Yep. Yes. Director Desmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I mean, I know this is a very difficult thing for you, for staff, and like James has said many times, I know staff is doing the best you can. It's just inherently difficult serving this board because we have so many competing interests. So I completely understand that, and I appreciate the time you've spent with me specifically and with county staff. I think sometimes some things at SACOG become confusing. And maybe it's me. I'm not always the sharpest tool in the shed, but it makes me think of, I used to work at the legislature, and you think of the black box story, how different things go into this black box and all of a sudden something comes out, and sometimes you don't really understand why what was put in gives you the result that you see. So I think that's the feeling I have a lot of times when I'm talking about this blueprint process. So, I appreciate you indulging me in questions I've asked in our individual meetings and some questions I'll be asking here. And I'm very interested in public comment as well. I'll have some additional comments after that. Questions I want to confirm with you, Zach, is so the change from, and I was not here in April, and I apologize if I was not able to provide any input then. in Sacramento County specifically, I think you went from 4,300 units in potentially developing to around 2,300. And so does that mean, I'm assuming some of those, the other 2,000, the difference, they went back into developing communities, not potentially. Can you just explain why it went from 4,300 and potentially developing to about half that now in this complete communities?
Yeah, that it would be going into developing community areas, the more VMT and GHG efficient, and those communities based on those 4 criteria that I outlined.
Okay. And I understand the purpose of that. I understand that once you have a certain amount of units, they perform better, right? I mean, I get that. I understand that. But something that Sacramento County has implemented, and several years ago, I believe, is a land use policy. I can't remember the number, LU 120 or something. James, you should think that's the right number, where the county very, very thoughtful and deliberate about making sure these new master plan communities incorporate GHG reductions, VMT reductions. Was that taken into account in the assumptions that you made? And if so, how? Can you just help walk me through that?
Yeah, so I think that gets to the crux of the kind of problem with the growth assumptions that we have of, the number of units that are going to be developed or that we anticipate will be developed within the region. And so those, say, the VMT efficiency of a fully built out plan, that cannot be taken into consideration in our plan because we have a 2050 horizon year and a 2035 greenhouse gas target horizon year. And so we have to look at what we anticipate will be built by those timeframes. And so policies like, so I'm not completely familiar. I don't have it memorized, LU 120, I believe. But we do our best to take into account, local jurisdictions' input, and anything we can relative to, policies they've implemented. But I will say that, in our modeling, we can't always take into consideration everything that has been adopted across the board.
Okay.
Director Desmond,
Yeah,
I think, and I'm also looking back to some of our technical team here as well. The question is, if I understand LU 120 and all the discussions we've had with your staff, you're basically trying to make sure that greenfield development is more efficient, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to figure out how do we develop new growth areas where you don't have to drive as much through all kinds of policies and interventions and circulation elements and the like. And some of that will get picked up in our travel model because this is all about modeling. So, land use patterns, housing, product type, some of that will get picked up. Some of the finer grain stuff that is still really important. We've had really good conversations, I think, with a lot of the development community, may not. If you want to understand exactly, it's not blind to it, but it's what gets picked up. The larger issues, is my understanding of product mix, housing type, jobs, housing balance, what Zach walked through earlier, those are going to be the key factors.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I mean, my struggle, and I understand it's the transportation, the VMT. You and I have had this discussion, but it's really, it's hard for me to wrestle with the fact that we are in Sacramento County, imposing some really tight limitations on these new master plan communities, and that may frankly have caused some of them to maybe lag behind in terms of time. And I feel like we're being negatively impacted by that. That's one concern. And I feel like, I know this discussion can quickly devolve into, municipalities competing against each other for who gets in, who doesn't get in. And I'm not even suggesting that because I know that's one of the most difficult challenges of SACOG, certainly from the staff's perspective. So the other question, I want to pivot a little bit to the mix of the assumptions you made, and also that term assumptions that you're making assumptions about where land use is going to happen, and I think that's also something I struggle with because we are there every day on the ground with county staff, with potential developers, infill, greenfield developers, working on all these things to improve development. But this blueprint is putting your finger on a scale. I mean, it is doing that. I understand the importance of it. I understand the need for it, but it is choosing winners over losers to an extent, and I get why. But when it comes to the assumptions you made on the infill, I know Sacramento County, we've sent 2 letters to SACOG. I know you've been meeting with county staff. In both those letters, the county was really clear about some of the challenges we're facing with infill development, not unlike a lot of challenges other jurisdictions are facing, but also some of the steps that we are taking. I mean, in the county, we're moving heaven and earth to attract more infill development. I mean, we have been bending so many county resources in that direction, setting aside funding to offset impact fees, really changing every aspect of development in the built-out areas to try to attract more infill. But even with all those steps, I feel like the assumptions you're making for infill, for Sacramento County anyway, are aspirational, but they don't reflect reality. And I'm concerned about that. And I wonder if I want to give you a chance to respond to that, Zach. And as kind of a follow-up to that, I also look at some of these infill, these centerline communities, and we talked about this a little bit on phone the other day, James, or Zoom, I think the other day. Some of these centerline communities are kind of far, to the east area. They're in my district, unincorporated Sacramento County, out in Fair Oak, some out in, Orangevale area. It seems to me, even from a VMT perspective, how would those perform better than some of these master plan communities along Jackson Highway, which are closer to jobs, closer to the downtown Sacramento core? Can you respond to that, Zach? And just I'd like to hear your thoughts.
And those 2 specific communities, the centers and corridors or established communities that you brought up on the phone call, I actually, we dug into it a bit and we looked those up, and they actually do perform better from a VMT and GHG standpoint. The exact numbers escape me, but it was around, 15 VMT per capita for those areas, which is pretty far below the regional average, and was much lower than what, some of those other developing communities you mentioned would generate at the levels of build out that we're anticipating for the blueprint.
Okay. But again, that's based on input going into that, black box that I don't fully understand.
Well,
So-
Director Desmond, I mean, look, this is a conversation we've had. I know black box gets thrown around. It is complicated.
It's apt.
I mean, sorry?
I think it's an appropriate, imagery
Well,
to an extent, James.
because I want to make the following point, right? So at the end of the day, a lot of what you see, and you saw the greenhouse gas numbers for 2035, that's a travel model. That is a, I don't know if it's black or orange or what color it is, but it's a travel model. It's pretty sophisticated. For a while, look, I've been here for 7 years. I too worried, is this real? Like, are the travel patterns here that we're modeling actually what's happening on the ground? We should always be asking ourselves that.
Yes.
Here's the good news. We have been able to buy, as many of you already, about, GPS and cell phone data and a whole tool called Replica. And we've been cross-referencing a lot of what our model says with actually what is happening on the ground. And it is pretty accurate. It is pretty accurate. So when we don't have the VMT map, and if you guys remember, we've shown you the VMT map many times, right? Green, yellow, red. Essentially, if you're a developing community on that map, you get a pretty good sense of how you're going to perform. And a lot of that, again, borne out by actual data, does suggest those are real. Now, the good news is all of you, just about all of you, have those green and yellow areas in your community. It is not concentric circles out from downtown Sacramento for all kinds of reasons about how this region grew up and a lot of our older towns. So I understand black box. I know it's complicated, which is why, honestly, we've tried to give you as much material as we can today to show you sort of what are the inputs in language that you'd understand. But I'd also say that it's not just our plan, right? SB 743, and this VMT stuff is here. We're going to have to manage it. And it is fairly accurate in terms of, again, what our models show. The other thing I'd say is, look, some developing communities are going to knock it out of the park. Some new growth areas are going to be below for all the things you've referenced, and others are going to be higher. Some of our established and older communities are going to be really low VMT, maybe in your district, and others are going to be very high. And so it's best we can do.
And then maybe to answer I don't think we directly answered your first question.
The question about why you put some units
the
in
infill or
was-
centers and corridors and established communities and that split. I will say for the region as a whole, we're right on with, the historical 5-year averages of development in those areas, which I think you It was presented in April, but was at, 67%. And in the discussion scenario and option 3, we're at 68%. So right in line with historical trends, recent historical trends for that type of development. In Sacramento County specifically, we are a bit more aggressive, but I will say that we have also policy objectives here of meeting the greenhouse gas target. And so in order to do that, we have to be more aggressive in some areas. And then we need to back it up with policy, such as Green Means Go and other programs and policies to help incentivize that and help kind of push that along and help out our local jurisdictions in getting that type of
Realizing
development.
that. kind
Yeah,
of growth.
realizing
And I
that.
appreciate it. I think it's that bit more aggressive is what I take issue with, because where you're a bit more aggressive there, that has implications, I think, with respect to some of the other developing and potentially developing units. And then the final question, James, you'd mentioned that if if grading is going on, I mean, it sounds like that's kind of a bright line rule from that point. Something physical is actually happening but we have other projects where we have maps approved, in 2 of them and I don't want to get into a conversation. I don't want to pick winners and losers amongst the developers in some of these potentially developing communities in Sacramento, but a lot of these are not speculative. For instance, Cordova Hills and Mather South, where they have maps. They are moving forward. Some of these developers, some of these communities not being included in this, it has real implications in terms of eligibility for funding, but it also has real implications in terms of investments, credibility for these projects. That does matter. And I don't, I understand why you had to choose kind of some point in terms of deciding what's moving forward, what's not, but that's having an impact and causing a great deal of concern. I think understandably so, with some of these developers that are really on the verge of actually moving dirt in some of these places. That's all I have for now. I'll wait for
Director Kozlowski.
I'll be brief. Would it be fair to say, as we talk about what goes into the black box, that the summary of this is that how many jobs are within 15 minutes of the given place that you put a house is the defining factor that determines what VMT you assign to the people who live in that house? Because all of the metrics have the jobs housing connection, and we're playing with those two. So I asked the question earlier about what does changing the volume mean? It would seem, and it's very encouraging to me actually, that you have kind of an infinite number of scenarios where you get to 19%. We may have the ability to consider some things that haven't moved dirt yet, because once things get rolling, sometimes they move a little quicker than what may have been anticipated. But is that really where the rubber hits the road, is how many jobs are within that 15-minute drive or, less of a given geography?
That's one large factor. Yes, you are correct. But there are many other factors, proximity to services, not just your job, but proximity to services. Still kind of the same or similar transportation land use. But then there's also other things like, telework. So, if you're working from home, that's all factored in. So but that land use and transportation interaction, you're right, that's the majority of that kind of the VMT generation is predicated on that.
So is it fair to say that the pluses and minuses that you used for the complete community scenario could have been formulated in a number of other ways in terms of what you put in and what you put out, and the reality of what actually gets built may yet be different, as long as we're policy-wise heading towards meeting the target?
I think we did the best that we could with the direction that we had relative to, maintaining the greenhouse gas target.
With respect, that's not an answer. Are there multiple ways to get?
Yeah,
to the
there's
19%?
always going to be multiple ways to do so.
Thank you. That's all.
Any other questions? Yes, Director Dube. Yeah, we'll go
Thank
for
you.
it.
And I agree about the admonition of keeping your powder dry till after you hear from the public. But I do have a couple of questions just to get me up to speed on what has transpired so far. And so I apologize. Obviously, I was not a part of the discussions to move from the discussion scenario to these option 3. But I see the results of it, and it just makes me a little bit curious. And so first thing I'd like to start is a broad view. And we've discussed this offline of the confusion that's created from the original blueprint, which was more of a visioning document, to now naming the MTP Blueprint 2025. And so what are the implications if a project is not included in Blueprint 2025? Are they considered not blueprint friendly at that point?
No, let me address this, as I've talked to many folks here about, and we wanted to call the plan something other than a 6-letter acronym. And our fantastic crack communications team said, hey, it's the 20th anniversary of the blueprint right now, because PS is the 20th anniversary of the blueprint. Let's call it that, so it has a name that, you know, somewhat rolls off the tongue. The 2004 blueprint, the original blueprint, exists and will still exist. And if your development project is in that blueprint, it still is in that blueprint. So if that's an important thing, Director Desmond, for many folks who have development projects, and we worked really hard 20 years ago, it still is there. This is every 4-year update. This is 5.5 because we've got our bill to extend it, thank goodness, to the MTPSCS. This is our long-range plan, transportation, sustainable community strategy. So if your development project is not in this plan, we understand it's really good to have it in. There is, and we'll hear from public comment, there is nothing we understand from the development side that holds you up. We've had this conversation, right?
Correct.
It does matter for transportation investments for sure, but if you're not in this plan, you're not going to sit in your hands. I hope you wouldn't the next 4 years and wait till the next one comes around.
And so what happens if a project moves forward in advance of being included in this plan?
It will come into the next one. If you're grading, right, you like, that is part of the reasonable test is you're in. I mean, if you're physically grading, you're in the next plan.
Okay, and so my grandfather, who I may reference later on in my comments, a very wise man, told me once that if you wish in one hand and spit in the other, only he didn't use the word spit, he used a word that rhymes with spit, I can tell you which one's going to fill up first. And so if we're putting together an aspirational plan that is not feasible, isn't that encouraging then plans that were not contemplated to rush to get in so that now they're forced to be included in the next plan? Aren't we working against ourselves a little bit if we're not being genuine about what we think will come out of the ground first?
I'd honestly have to think about it. I don't think so. I think you have a lot of growth projects. Remember, and we've had a lot of testimony about this, right? These are not all going to go. If you have 86,000 units of developing community capacity to be able to meet our target, the pipeline of this region is over 400,000. So Director Desmond, when you say, I don't like picking winners and losers, you know, nor do we, but there is a math problem of we are not going to absorb even all of our future growth just in greenfield areas because we've got 278,000, right? It's not going to happen. So we do the best we can, Director Hume, to figure out. It's a combination of both. It is aspirational. We have to be aspirational. That's why we have Green Means Go and infill. We have to be reasonable. Every single assumption is in your general plan. None of them are inconsistent. And by the way, we're one of the few regions that does that. What's in between there, we have to continually look at and reassess. And again, anybody's land use project not in this plan, you don't have to stop. You come back, and if you're grading in 4 years, we can't not be in the plan.
Okay.
Yeah, and Director Hume, to your point, and I think, you know, Director Kozlowski brought this up in a certain way as well to your question. And the best way I can describe it for the group is, so it isn't so much working against ourselves, but it's because you want to be able, because the flip side of that is then this body is going to be making very prescriptive land use decisions for Sacramento County, for the city of Folsom, for the city of Placerville in a way that would stop those other, developments from going forward. So I think that's really where the rubber hits the road, is that if we did go down that road, then we are being much more prescriptive. So there is a little bit of a playing catch up, I think, because something that's not in the plan, breaks ground next year. And so in 4 years, they're going to be now in the plan. But if we took a different route, then we would basically be saying, no, you can't be in it. Like, we're making that decision as a body for you.
Well, and that's an important distinction because one of the things that determines feasibility is the influx of capital, right? And that is part of how market decisions get made. And so somebody who wants to invest in certainty for their project might move forward from somebody who is squandering out there a little bit. So this last line of questioning, and then I promise I'll be done. And I tread lightly here because I don't want my first meeting in this body to be throwing sharp elbows as a ball hog and suggesting that this is a zero-sum game where I have to rob from Peter in order to pay Paul. But there is an aspect of that, right? And so why didn't staff consider moving units between counties in order to meet those plus marks that were turning the knob up on the amplitude? And particularly, when you talk about, you said that you did not consider Sacramento to be concentric circles working out. And yet when the colonel was there giving the presentation on Beale, he showed the donut hole that here's where everybody works and here's where they live. And so, and then when you look at proximity to jobs, there are many job centers within the Sacramento region, the biggest of which arguably is downtown, but also Rancho Cordova. And so there are units or specific plans that have adjacency to Rancho Cordova that were taken out when this was implemented to go to the option 3. And so again, I'm not saying that another county or another jurisdiction has to lose in order for Sacramento County to prosper, but can you walk me through that consideration?
Yeah, so that was explicitly out of the April board meeting where there was, direction to not go about doing it that way. Essentially, we made a commitment based on, feedback we received from the board that was not going to be the kind of direction we took for option 3, that we were going to maintain the land use kind of allocations for at least within each of the counties. So we weren't moving from county to county. And that was one of the guideposts that I had mentioned
That was
before.
board driven then.
What? Yes.
And Director Hume, just so everybody's clear, we did do that in the development last year, all the way up through the discussion scenario. So we don't go back to the last plan and say, okay, you still get 17%. We looked. And look, one of the narratives in this plan update is Placer County has boomed, right? There's more growth now. And what we should be all cheering for Placer County is to get more jobs, because actually that's really good for the plan and for VMT. But between April and May, as Zach just said, if we start shifting units between your counties, we're going to be here for 4 to 6 more months. So that kind of led up to April in terms of higher, lower growth rates, permitting, everything else. But it was a question that was asked, and we gave the answer. We don't think that's a good idea. And so the direction was keep the growth for this exercise between April and May constant, like within the, between the counties.
So then I guess, and this will be my last comment. Thank you, Chair. I guess my consternation as it relates to Sacramento County, and this may be true in other jurisdictions as well. And you mentioned about consulting with local agencies of whether or not the projections that are being put forth can be accommodated, that there's capacity, that they are reasonable and feasible and likely. And I guess, I have 2 letters here, one from our planning director, one from our deputy county executive, that implored SACOG, think differently as it relates to Sacramento County, and yet what's in front of me is the exact opposite. So that's more of an opinion statement.
Well, I just want to say, we did shift growth in option 3 as a result of conversations in the letter that Sacramento County submitted. And we've been in very close touch with your staff. If we had shifted growth, the original letter from Sac County in October, you would not meet the greenhouse gas target. That is just, so I wish it were otherwise, but if the board wants to have a plan that meets the greenhouse gas target, you've got a lot of growth in Sac County, a lot of population. And so that was hard to do, but we did hear those letters. You talked to your staff, and that is why, some of the changes actually did happen. We didn't do all of them, but we did some of them.
Thank you. Couple of questions. There's a mix to arrive. The greenhouse gas target is a function primarily of VMT. What percentage of the target was designed to be met or assumed to be met at the outset by a shift to EVs?
Well, I think in.
Because VMT, I mean, if you're in if you're in an EV, that vehicle mile should not account against greenhouse gas.
That's
okay?
accounted for before we get our greenhouse gas
unfortunately, the
target by
state
the
takes
state.
credit
The
for that.
state
Thank you.
takes
So
credit for that.
what, at the beginning, and things have changed with respect to the outlook for EVs. So at the beginning, there had to be an assumption that this percentage was going to be pure VMT, and this percentage was going to be a shift to EVs. And the mandated shift, what, by 2035 or something like that? I mean, this shouldn't be a black box. This should be absolutely transparent. We're a public institution. We shouldn't have to guess. And what I'm thinking about, let me just jump ahead. I'm sorry, I don't need to sound attacking it. There's been a real shift in the outlook for EVs, a market shift. Ford has shut down their plants. My former business colleague, Mark Mills, who's at the Manhattan Institute now, has destroyed intellectually, he's a brilliant physicist, the outlook for EVs on the grand scale that was originally forecast. So if the EV outlook shrinks, that puts more pressure on straight VMTs, which puts more pressure on these developments.
Director Ranscom, you want to?
Oh, yeah.
I was just going to say the either satisfying or very unsatisfying answer is EVs do not really factor into this. And we've had this discussion many times, right? What if we could get people to own EVs, and new growth areas had EVs, but this really is a straight VMT for reasons I can but won't get into about what the state takes credit for.
Well, let's presume, for the sake of argument, that it was 100% EVs, then there'd be no greenhouse gas. So you're saying they're irrelevant. They can't be irrelevant.
In the timeframe of 2035, our target is really about VMT, and we get a tiny bit of credit for EV if we can beat the state on uptake, but not much.
So I'm going to pause our board discussion for right now so we can get, I do want to make sure we get our public to comment. So we will get to more questions, but I want to go ahead and take public comment at this time. And so we will go, so we'll open public comment and we'll go to Chris Norum with Northern BIA first. Good morning, Chris. Welcome.
Good morning. You guys hear me? Chris Norum with the North State Building Industry Association. So I represent 500 member companies who are the builders and developers throughout the region. I want to thank James and the staff for all their hard work on these multiple scenarios, and make it clear that our organization supports creating an array of housing choices for local families, and working collaboratively with all of your local jurisdictions to provide that housing that we all need so desperately. I want to make it clear that while this land use pattern is a necessary act as part of this process for SACOG, that we just want to make it clear that local governments, counties and cities retain exclusively the right to dictate who is in charge of making those local land use decisions. And then in terms of the overall context, as of the 2020 MTP that was last done, SACOG they are projecting to being on track for the 19% reduction. Just a couple of notable statistics as context, it shows that in that model that was already adopted 4 years ago, transit increases from 1.3% to 2.4% over the length of that time. Single occupancy vehicles go from 43% to 41%, and walking and biking goes from 9% to 11%. That's in a plan that actually meets the standard as of 4 years ago. So overall, we're talking about some very minute changes in behavior that are actually adjusting to these standards, and that should be kept in mind by the board. The current discussion draft shows an 18% reduction. And I know that there's a lot of discussion about center corridor communities, greenfield areas. I know that the center corridor communities are aggressive, but I will note that our association is working very closely, collaboratively, and aggressively with a lot of the local jurisdictions, including Sacramento County, to try to make those things happen. So, we're going to try to, do what we can to create that. And so it's a moving target, but just keep in mind, I think that we are working throughout the region to try to make some of those things happen. And so there should be some flexibility noted for that. I also want to note importantly that state law currently requires that all new housing projects reproduce a 15% VMT reduction. So you'll see that when you guys approve projects in your EIRs, you'll see you guys have all adopted guidelines. You have thousands of votes you guys cast. I don't expect you to remember this, but you guys have all adopted guidelines as to how new projects actually achieve that 15% reduction in new growth.
30 seconds.
Oh, boy. All right. Well, I'll just say that in terms of the different scenarios, I think that the last scenario, the completed communities one, I think it strains credibility to reach alignment with reality. I'm not, in support of one project or another here as a representative of the industry, but I would like to make sure that we factor that in. I also will note that there are some areas in the region that are pursuing some policies that would be extremely problematic to the projections for their housing growth, especially in the city of Sacramento, where they're looking at inclusionary zoning, which according to their own analysis would actually stop about 70% of the housing. So please take that into consideration when you're looking at this, and we look forward to continuing to work with the staff on the transportation assumptions as we go to the next phase. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll go to Oscar Ballinger with 350 Sacramento next.
Oh, I have a quick question, and maybe this is for staff. Chris mentioned that there was a requirement for 15% VMT reduction in new construction. What part of that credit do we consider for this plan?
Are you asking me?
You're talking to me.
Yeah, so I think that's based on, and Chris, Senate Bill 743, correct? The VMT. Yeah, so it's 15% or 15% below the existing per capita VMT for new construction. And that's to be less than significant if that's your local jurisdiction's adopted threshold for vehicle miles traveled. That's to be less than significant under the California Environmental Quality Act. And so local jurisdictions set their own thresholds there's a recommendation from the Office of Planning and Research, the State Office of Planning and Research on what those should be, but local jurisdictions can set their own threshold that they adopt for vehicle miles traveled. And then if that threshold is not exceeded, they can be considered less than significant under the California Environmental Quality Act for impact to vehicle miles traveled.
Okay, so let me ask it a different way then. I guess, is this yet another state law that's put into place that we cannot consider for our reduction? Or is that considered in the general plan and our local policies for the reduction?
Yeah, so that would be considered in the actual environmental impact report for a specific community or specific plan, what have you, or development. And that would be based on the complete build out, getting back to this complete build out and that's based on complete build out of that plan. Does that answer your question?
I guess my question is simply, just help me connect the dot here. I understand that. I understand that local jurisdictions have that ability. When we're considering the blueprint plan moving forward, where does that fit into our consideration, or can we not consider it similar to how we cannot consider
I don't think
amount
it's the
of
same.
EVs?
No, it's not.
Right, it's not the same. So, and this is a similar, I think, to the question that Director Desmond asked. If there are things because of SB 743 that a project is doing through the EIR to reduce vehicle miles traveled, and those things are picked up in the way that we model that development, they should be picked up in our analysis.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Oscar, come back up.
Thank you. I'm Oscar Ballinger with Sacramento 350. You have our written comments, I think, and I'll hit a few high points. So the blueprint is my deepest dive so far into SACOG's processes, and I'm sincerely gratified by the quality of the staff work that we've seen here today, for instance, and by the thoughtfulness of your discussions today and in previous reviews of this subject. So thank you very much. We support option 3, the complete communities scenario, it's no secret that reducing VMT is essential to climate stabilization and that increasing urban density is the way to reduce VMT. In California, local agencies have land use authority and responsibility, and CARB has always said that climate smart land use is essential to meet the state's climate goals. SB 375 is one expression of that. So it's local agencies like you that have the most essential and the hardest lift to fight climate change. Are you up for it? Are you up to it? Option 3 would direct 2/3 of future growth to infill and the rest into a small number of low VMT greenfield projects. This is important because jurisdictions have approved far more dwelling units in the region than the market can absorb. So they cannot all build out to perform as complete communities. For instance, the intent of Sacramento's County Land Use Policy 120. As the option 3 allows SACOG a shot at meeting its reduction goal, directing 2/3 of development to infill. We wish it were more than
30 seconds.
We wish it were more than 2/3. Every ton of avoided GHG emissions, every ounce is meaningful. But we know you're not magicians. Please do what it takes to approve a fully credible, fully effective, sustainable community strategy. There's an awful lot riding on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oscar. Next, Doug Ossie, Mr. Ossie, please.
Good morning, Doug Ossie, 4013 Park Road. I want to make 2 points regarding item 10, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. As you know, I've been following closely the actions of the SACOG board and its consideration of the current MTP SCS. I've read the reports issued by SACOG staff, and I sympathize with the situation board members find themselves in, with reports that are dozens of pages long, with you have no staff assistants to talk through different things. My first dissatisfaction with the process to date has been the lack of transparency in the assumptions and modeling inputs used in any given analysis. I know you've had a lot of discussion about that this morning. The model was created using public funds. SACOG is a public agency. And I'm a pretty skilled, I have a pretty skilled or high level of understanding how government works, but I have yet to find the place where I can go and find a concise presentation of the assumptions and inputs used in this modeling. A few examples of information that would be helpful to those of us who actually build housing are, was any VMT or GHG modeling done for the years beyond 2035? Within the VMT analysis, what are the assumptions used to inform somebody about VMT? Who selected the input parameters? How were trip links and trip rates determined? To what degree were other permutations of VMT reviewed? In other words, did they spin the dial a little bit this way or that to see the impacts? Again, where does a citizen go to review these inputs into the model? Within the GHG analysis, what assumptions were used? What mitigation measure? One of you asked about, I think Director Lozano asked about what mitigation measures, if any, are incorporated within the model. Have model assumptions been reviewed by any external parties? For instance, have you brought in somebody from the BIA to look at these? To summarize this first concern, can any of you easily determine the parameters under which you are going to allocate significant federal and state transportation funding? I would submit to you that the answer today is no. My second point is that SACOG staff has shown with the analysis as option 3, which I do appreciate and I'm supportive of.
30 seconds.
With the analysis of option 3, that they can create a plan that meets the GHG and VMT standards. And that's a good thing. But what they've shown you in option 3 is not the answer. It is an answer. We need to keep that in mind. The analysis shows that the mandated reduction is achievable even before accounting for significant local mitigation measures. I've previously tested, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask for 30 seconds. I've previously testified that not all points of data are equally important. I've suggested to you in past meetings guiding principles by which SACOG could help local jurisdictions guide development within their respective jurisdictions. I want to compliment staff on proving the case that there are an enormous or almost infinite number of ways by which you can achieve your GHG and VMT requirements by calibrating the dials on trip length or frequency of trip and what have you. I urge this board to insist that language be included in your final product that specifies that there is no single answer, that there are multiple answers to us achieving our GHG and VMT standards. I'd be happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You seem reluctant.
It's unusual to do questions back, at least in my jurisdictions, do questions back to public commenters, but I'll allow it.
Oh, it can be done in so long as it's not.
Well, we're got a lot of time, so go ahead and ask a question.
Thank you. Doug, we've known each other a long time. You're an experienced developer. What do you think, what's your experience with infill projects and what are the big challenges there?
I'm appreciative of the question. I've been doing this for over 45 years. Interestingly, most of the projects have had to address the challenge of neighborhood opposition in the form of nice project, wrong location dynamic. Most of the projects I've been involved in meet SACOG's definition today of infill. I will tell you, though, that I would ask the rhetorical question, would I do those things again? And my answer is it depends on the margins. There's an enormous amount of what I call brain damage that comes from engaging in an infill project. You go to war with people in a community who otherwise might oppose your project. In my opinion, based on direct experience, the assumptions being used in the MTP SCS for the level of development attributable to infill are unrealistic. Nobody's going to undertake these projects because for the same amount of money and for the same amount of effort, they can go elsewhere and make more money. Let me give you two examples, one that I took on and one which I passed. I presently have a project in Sacramento County. I bought the property next door to my house, paid over $1 million for it. I'm going to be able to create 4 lots on it. When you consider the question of infrastructure in your deliberations, if I were to build that at a higher density than basically 1 unit per acre, I'm going to have to extend a sewer line 850 feet at a cost of $450,000. So again, going to infill, it's doable, but the question is, where is my time best spent? On that project, it's right next to my existing house. My wife's been after me to buy that property for 22 years. So there are non-financial considerations here. But in an ordinary sense, I wouldn't have taken it. The second example was a piece of property in Mr. Desmond's district on Winding Way, 9 acres. Beautiful piece of property. Beezer Homes bought it in 2005 for $3.2 million. When they went to put a map on it, the conditions on the map were that they had to contribute to solving a flood control issue along Arcade Creek. And the dynamic they were placed in was that the neighborhood, Evergreen Estates, said, if you don't pay for that, we're going to take you to court. So fast forward to last year, I had that property, again, Beazer paid 3.2 million for it in 2005, tried to put a 52 lot subdivision map on it and ran into a buzzsaw.
Mr. Osi, could you wrap, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Anyway, ran into a buzzsaw.
Could
I
you wrap
picked up
up
the
now,
property at
please?
$250,000 and then couldn't figure out how to pay for the
Mr. Osi, I've been pretty gracious. Can
$950,000
you
street
please wrap up,
frontage.
please?
Can I finish my sentence?
Yes.
The $950,000 of street frontage improvements for 4 lots that the County Water Resources Department would support being developed there. So if you talk about infill, you got to be realistic. The assumptions in your plan right now are not realistic, in my opinion. I appreciate the question.
Chair, I have a question.
No.
Just point of order, I don't believe we're supposed to go back and forth during public comments. Is that correct? Just our legal, I just want to,
It's not our common practice.
Okay.
Normally, we do public comments and then discussion at the
thank
end.
you.
We're
And the
gonna do it
discussion
afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna go to our next.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna go to our next public comment. Ms. Bartis.
Good afternoon, board and staff, and I echo everyone previously, and thank you so much for taking on this very difficult subject. It's not easy, it's not fun, and it's quite honestly a battle. I, Rachel Bartis, have been a developer in a developer family for many years. I've done anything from single family detached to infill, and I echo the same statements. Infill is not for the light of heart. It is more risk and not more reward. So I would also strongly consider that when you're focusing on those areas, unless there's a significant amount of money that can contribute to that to overcome the risk, you're not going to get any developers to do it. That said, I am now proudly representing Cordova Hills, Braden, and it's a community that is meant to have always been sustainable from the start. It was approved in 2013 as a leapfrog. It is quite literally in the path of development. It has infrastructure that we tie into, and we also are conditioned and are a part of actively working on infrastructure that supports the entire area around us, including SMUD, water. We are starting our very first phase with our currently now approved 3 tentative maps. We're starting our first phase with a mass grading permit that will be over 900 units, and it will also comprise of 900,000 square feet of commercial retail as a part of our very first phase of development. If you want to talk about a developer doing something different, being bold and trying something new that speaks specifically to exactly what you're talking about today, that is what Cordova Hills is set to do. We are 1 month away from pulling our mass grading permit. It's just the simple legal things that need to be tied up on the easements for the preserve transfer. As soon as the preserves are transferred, it's a done deal. We're pulling our permit. There are no comments left. So in that case, this is, again, I've written a letter. It's in front of you all. I am very concerned about why, even if it's just for optics, this is not a part of discussion scenario 3, and very limited numbers are even in the 2030 consideration or 35 consideration. 900 is what I'm doing today. We have 350 right now shown in the plan.
30
So,
seconds.
With that, I just wanted to share, if it hasn't already come through with Sacramento County representatives and staff, I continue to echo it. I really am concerned why Braden or Cordova Hills continues to drop off a lot of scenarios or is underserved on what we're actually doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Braden. Bartis, sorry. Okay, any other public questions, comments? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for more discussion. Yes, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question for staff, and if Zach, given what was just the statement that was just made, this seems like a very unique situation here where you have a grading permit that's imminent we're adopting a land use next month. I mean, so I'm curious if it's true that when you start grading that you're in the plan. This is a unique and maybe there's others that I'm not aware of in Sacramento County, but I'm just curious, at that point, would we literally flip the switch and put them in the plan? And do you have any idea what that would, anticipation of how that would affect this chart?
So I will say that I don't believe we have this information. We did extensive, coordination and intake with public jurisdictions of different data, and permits and all that kind of stuff. And we did not receive this information until just recently. So I think as staff, we would need to go back and decide how to consider this. I don't think I can give you a direct answer right now because I've never encountered this this kind of situation where it's right when we're adopting it. But I will say that this plan is, this is a continuous plan. It's updated every 4 years. So if, Cordova Hills or any other development is not in this plan or is just in it with a limited amount of units, the next iteration of the plan in 4 years, then we would take into account all those reasonableness factors again and, would need to really reflect what is happening on the ground.
Yeah, and totally understand that. And again, just because this is a unique circumstance, right?
Yeah.
I think, and maybe it's for staff direction later on, but I think keeping in close contact with Spartus and
Definitely.
seeing what comes before our June meeting, I think that might change this particular model a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other,
Yeah, sorry, I know it was requested earlier to have these discussions, whatever, offline. I just want to say for the record, that Sutter County will be reaching out to staff to discuss their concerns on Sutter Point and making sure that we get that added to the blueprint, right? With the actual numbers and stuff that are forecasted. Any other suggestions, recommendations we made at the same time? Thank you.
Director Bradford.
Yeah, just to share a little bit of a personal experience that I've had as a director and a little bit of perspective in this process. So I know at the last board meeting, I definitely shared concerns and questions about some of the land use assumptions in Yuba County and my jurisdiction. They didn't necessarily align with what I felt was reality based on the information that I have as a local elected with a little closer to boots on the ground. As requested, SACOG staff met with Yuba County staff and myself. We had an outstanding meeting. Staff was able to really go through with me what they've kind of reiterated today, that threshold sometimes is, is dirt being moved? What is the history of that previous project, right? Has dirt been moved before? Is dirt about to be moved, right? How realistic is the project from that perspective? The other thing I think it's important to keep in mind, and I was certainly going into this as kind of looking really towards 2050, right? Because that's the plan, 2050. So I look at the numbers and I go, do I think that these numbers are realistic to 2050? No, no, I don't, right? But it's important to keep in mind that how realistic are those numbers though for the next 4 years, right? We have another bite at the apple in 4 years. And so if I have a project that I think is going to happen between now and 2050, but the dirt hasn't moved, but in the next 4 years, the dirt moves, then as we discussed, that project gets into the next plan. And I just think that's really important from a perspective standpoint. I was really looking really far out and looking at the numbers from that perspective, but really what we're looking at is what are the numbers in the next 4 years? And so just important to kind of keep that in mind. And so it was really informative for me to have that understanding and have that perspective.
Director Hume.
Thank you, Chair. I want to begin my comments a little bit off topic from what we're talking about today, but relative to greenfield versus infill from what was brought up with respect to electric vehicles. Electric vehicles do great things for emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, but they do nothing for congestion. And so if you are not planning for a likely future, then you're not working towards something that's going to come to be. And so you're constraining things more. And so when it comes to infill development, absolutely desirable, absolutely fits the plan model better. But if we artificially constrain the construction of new single-family homes, then what we do is we cause gentrification in our established communities, and we drive what have been traditionally affordable communities, drive people out of homeownership or make homeownership unattainable for those trying to get into it. And so with that recognition in mind, when James and I met very early on, I said, I'm going to take zero housing options off the table until we start to sincerely address our housing shortage. And so when you look at Sacramento County, there's a notch along the Jackson Highway corridor that by LAFCO standards is the most annexable area, for lack of a better term, because it's surrounded on three sides by growth. And you look at projects that are in the adjacency of Rancho Cordova, and Rancho Cordova is one of these largest job centers in the non-downtown Sacramento part of our region. And so when you get into calling it out by plan, by plan, by plan, you ignore those market forces that are working against us. And I appreciate Director Bradford's point about the fact that we were really only starting a stopwatch that may change and be upended in 4 years, but there's also inevitability that gets built into all of these things. And it starts becoming, well, we can't do that because we've always factored that, and that's going to throw us farther out of compliance. And then I did say that I'd reference my grandfather again. He was aghast at the fact that we developed the Natomas Basin because that's some of, according to him, the deepest topsoil in the state. But that horse left the barn decades ago. And so to not consider the adjacency of the Natomas Basin with respect to the job center of downtown and the international airport, I think we're doing a disservice of what's actually going to happen within this foreseeable future of, 11 to whatever 2024 to 2050 is. So I mean, I don't really know this exercise because again, this is my first meeting, but I can't in good conscience vote for this plan, accept this plan, because I don't think it's realistic to what's actually going to come out of the ground. And so while I laud the infill developments, and certainly in my colleague Rich Desmond's district, we are trying to do some things to incentivize it, set the table, make it as appealing as we possibly can. But as was mentioned, the constraints are piled up against us. And so from a brain damage standpoint, as was mentioned, I just don't see those numbers coming to fruition in the way that has been projected in this plan. And then also, I think there are some numbers in here, and I happen to know a little bit about Elk Grove from having served down there, where there's numbers being projected in some of the areas in Elk Grove that I think that they're more built out than that currently. And so maybe they don't even have that capacity. So like I said, I don't want to get into a rob Peter to pay Paul, but if we're not factoring in adjacency to downtown Sacramento or adjacency to existing commercial residential areas, I think we're not being realistic, and we're wishing in the one hand, and it's not going to fill up in this.
Thank you, Director Desmond.
And I'll just follow up with my colleague and appreciate and agree with every one of the points. In Sacramento County, obviously what we're focused on is providing more housing with the most, the cleanest projects possible. And every day we're looking at what is most likely to help us reach that very acute need, right? And I think all those factors Supervisor Hume mentioned are important. And I just want to give you a chance, Zach, to respond to that adjacency issue, because I know some of the projects are certainly a little further out in terms of time, but how is that addressed? How is that factored in, that adjacency issue?
So I guess if you're talking about adjacency to the existing built environment.
Right. So let's talk about the Jackson Corridor projects, for instance, where they are surrounded on 2 or 3 sides by built out environments or by existing communities.
Yeah, I think it is taken into account. I mean, that was one of the criteria that I had put up there. The adjacency to the existing urban footprint, that was one of the criteria we used for development of option 3. And as I mentioned for option 3, the complete community scenario, there just wasn't, due to some of the factors, the reasonableness factors, there wasn't just the ability to move a ton of units in that time frame as well. But that is definitely something that's taken into account. It was taken into account in the development of option 3, and it's also accounted for in the modeling that's done. The proximity to destinations, to jobs, of housing, et cetera. That's all, that's accounted for. That kind of interaction between land use and transportation is inherently kind of what the transportation model does that we use.
And that's fine. Yeah, go ahead, Jay. Because I mean, taken into account, I mean, there's some judgment and discretion and subjectivity there when you say taken into account. I guess that's what some of us struggle with. There's not a,
I mean,
an
some of the-
explicit mathematical formula, but
It's, look, we have done, our best job today, right, to give you all the criteria in
Right.
plain English that go into the model. And Director Kozlowski, before he left, was asking the right question, which is what really drives this, right? And we can give you a debrief on that, but it is adjacency and it is jobs. And based on your direction from April, we looked at that, which is why West Jackson now pops up. West Jackson is not in our current plan. West Jackson pops up. It's why Delta Shores pops up. It's why, even though it's not right in our plan, but if we had, there's so few, really few units overall. I know it's binary why it's big, but even frankly, the Upper West Side, okay? The Upper West Side, just south of the airport, looks like it might look pretty good on a VMT perspective because of adjacency. So I do want to make sure you all understand that is really big and it matters a lot. And again, that VMT map, that we've shown you repeatedly, I think is a very helpful sort of base framework for you all to think about how these different growth areas would perform.
so we had some, we don't need to belabor this anymore, but I did receive some language for consideration from a couple different sources. Have you had a chance to look at that? Or actually, I'll wait till after the meeting and provide it to staff with a request maybe to consider maybe incorporating it. And it's related to just articulate some challenges to infill, benefits of development in new growth areas in terms of if these are growth areas that are very low or zero GHG producing, and then some different options. I'm going to provide that to you, James, and maybe ask for a conversation with you and staff about incorporating some of that language possibly into the blueprint.
If it's the language Mr. Osi shared with us, look, come one, come all, right? I would hope that you'd want ideas from a variety of people and stakeholders. And then what we said when Mr. was presented that in April, I think the Land Use Committee is, we're not going to write the plan for 12 more months, but actually his idea on more complete communities, not only have we done that under option 3, but you actually see a performance benefit under it, right? So I do want to make sure that you understand that we are listening, we're hearing. We're not yet writing the plan, but we are actually trying to figure out how can we give you analysis and data, as we did this morning for option 3, that actually responds to some of those concerns. If you're speaking about the same language.
I think I'm speaking, it's language for consideration, 3 separate areas.
We can
So
look
I
at
can
it
share
after.
with you offline, but I'm not,
Sure.
obviously not going to
Sure.
make a motion to amend anything or insert it right now. But I want to have a conversation with you about it because I think some of it makes sense and maybe gets at some of the issues that are causing some of us some trepidation with this.
We will also have language in the plan, as we have every other plan, saying nothing in this plan takes away local land use authority. I think maybe you'd
Well,
like to see that.
and I'd like to address that because I know that that's legally, this does not supplant local land use authority, but it does erode it to an extent. I mean, it absolutely influences.
I just want to be clear, everything in this plan, in option 1 and option 3, is compatible with your general plan. So if you have an issue, this is based on your general plans.
Not specific projects, though, James. I mean, there are plans that the Sacramento County has approved that are not in it.
Sure,
this year.
okay,
Right,
but I'm
okay.
just saying, if
And
we're
that's a
not
function, that's a land use.
incompatible with your, and remember, Director Sanders said, hey, the numbers look spiked. If you look at the general plan build out, which is in one of your attachments, right, they're huge. And so our job is figure out what in those general plans, right, is both realistic, but also achievable and aspirational to meet the greenhouse gas. I'm just trying to make the point, we are not inconsistent with your general plans, but we don't nearly take all of them into account. That's true.
James, just a quick point of order. It looks like, I mean, do we have, we lose quorum, I would assume. There's no vote, but well, there was direction we were supposed to give though at the end of this.
If you
So we're
have
gonna probably roll.
any closing direction here for us.
We do have a couple of more comments from Director Schaefer and Director Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some closing direction. A question for Zach. Do you feel like this process has been transparent with the development community?
Yeah, we have been in contact with the
How could we possibly be more transparent with the development community? We hear from 3 developers here, and all of them had concerns about transparency. How do we make it more transparent? How do we make that information accessible to them where they can digest it? Certainly not, they could certainly have a meeting with you, but there's certainly some time where that particular person might want to meet with you, and they may want to meet with their staff at the same time, so that we all have a really cooperative attitude towards developing this plan.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, we are open to and have been taking meetings with the development community and specific developers to talk through any questions and issues they may have. And during those meetings, if they have specific questions, then we can look into some of those, the questions and concerns they have, and we can get back to them on those.
Great. I would like to see certainly everybody make sure they're heard. Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, we have met with every request that has come in. We've met and sometimes repeated multiple times. As we talked, Director Joyner told you last month, we've been in front of the BIA as well. And we are always happy for more, really. We would welcome that. So I really encourage that.
Director Frost. Director Guile, I think, might have a comment as well after that. So Director Frost, go for it.
Yeah, Zach, I want to thank you and the staff for all your hard work on this. I know this is difficult every time. I also want to say I too was surprised at the complete communities and the list of those that were not included. There were comments today regarding assumptions and modeling inputs, and also comments relating to what mitigations are included in the model. You gave us what's included, but I'm not sure what's. And there was an indication from the development community that they were a little bit surprised at the outcome of the analysis. And I'm wondering if there's a way that there are other mitigations that could be looked at that could maybe improve the outlook for our housing, because at Sacramento County, we are trying really hard to get rooftops. It's something that's at the forefront of our mind, and we're also doing everything we can to create incentives for infill, which is very difficult. And to everything from zoning to by right, we're doing things that I wonder if those could be mitigations or could, influence the numbers. I wonder if there's a way, and I guess this kind of tags on to what Member Schaefer's comment about, can we make it more transparent so that we can better understand, really take a more in-depth look at what can we do to improve the outlook for these complete communities that are really ready to pop, and everyone knows it. And it's almost like we're creating an obstacle for what we need the most in this, and we've never really been able to achieve, call it MTPSCS or blueprint. We've never really achieved the numbers. So this is an aspirational document, and I know it's necessary, but is there a way that we can take a closer look at, a more transparent look at what are the mitigations that are being included, what's not being included, and how can we improve the outlook for complete communities?
Director Frost, one idea on this.
And it does impact the development community. These kinds of things impact funding, they impact road funding. It has a huge impact. It's a lid. It's really basically putting them in a box and putting a lid on it.
we've talked a little bit about what is the blueprint plan when we continue to move forward and get into adoption as fall of 2025. We want some very specific implementation strategies, actually, that it's not just SACOG saying this should happen, but it actually is all of our cities and counties, all of our special districts and folks like the private sector. And I think it's a great idea actually to think about what do we need to do to remove more of these barriers, right? I think that is a great topic to think about whether we can include that as some commitments in the long-range plan.
Thank you. Just real quickly, sitting in this seat, it's really interesting because we all are here and we represent our own jurisdictions, but we are here as a group to work together. One of the things that I noticed, and we all have very different experiences. Quite frankly, I'm in a community that's near, other than a couple big projects, I'm near build out. But my infill is incredibly marketable. I don't have any problems with people trying to develop in my infill spots. We're all looking at it a little bit differently. But one of the concerns that I have, and maybe we can put, is that communication goes both ways. I can't get a letter that's dated yesterday. It has a development name on it that means nothing to me until I do the work to go find out what's Braden. I don't know what Braden is. There's no reference or information to give me that. So I think one of the things that we can put out to remind people that the conversation goes both ways is even just something to say, I know you do, we're developing this. Get your input into us as you can and give some deadlines or some dates so that we have the opportunity to really delve into that, to look. And I don't know how we can help you with that if we need to do it with our own jurisdictions. But how can we get some responsibility back out on that public, to the developing public, to get that information to you?
And I think we have been in contact with local jurisdictions throughout this process, during the discussion scenario, the development of the discussion scenario last year. We had extensive, meetings, office hours, as well as, presentations to local jurisdictions. We took a ton of comments. We made the changes where possible. And then for option 3, also, we tried to get comments and feedback from local jurisdictions, from all local jurisdictions. After we got directions to proceed, we sent out an email to all, as you mentioned, setting a deadline to get us your comments by this time on this option 3, and how you would kind of prioritize, or if you have any additional input that may help us developing these scenarios. Yeah.
Yes, Director Branscombe.
Thank you, sir. James, you and your staff have a real challenge here. The complexity of the subject matter and how the parts work together is so challenging. I used to practice tax law. In fact, I was a red hot tax lawyer. And tax law is very opaque, but I could provide clarity to clients, and I could even provide clarity on the gray areas and the maneuvering area within gray areas. I think that challenge has not yet been met here. It doesn't seem to be. It seems completely opaque to me. And I can't imagine what it's like to imagine developers have a better grip on it, but we're hearing a consistent concern about clarity. And I think it's the challenge of the subject matter. And getting this thing, and I'm on board with, we're aboard. We're trying to get something across the finish line in a blueprint. And to get it across the finish line in a blueprint, I think there's some challenges that remain, and I'm respectful of the difficulty of those challenges and encourage even more work on getting people comfortable with some level of clarity, predictability. We don't want to go forward and appear arbitrary. And I'm not suggesting that's going to happen, but there's the risk. Thank you.
Director.
Thank you, Chair. Question first, real quick. Zach, is it possible, looking at discussion scenario and option 3, to massage or adjust, you mentioned turning up the volume on these criteria, but for your exercise to play with different ways to Director Kozlowski's point earlier, other ways to get to the 19% within these margins.
Yeah, there's always going to be different ways to get there, but the fundamental question here is time.
Yeah. Can you, well, within that time, again, you know, within the allowed constraints here, but do you think you're able to offer up maybe a hybrid of sort of discussion scenario on option 3?
Vice Chair Soon, I'll just jump in. If you want to stay on a June schedule, which stays on your blueprint schedule, I don't think we can do that on a June schedule.
Okay, so it's either or.
That's why we brought both of these. That's why to your request, you wanted to keep option 1 on the table. It's a discussion scenario that meets the target. You know, we developed with this alternative option, which I'm hearing a lot of concerns about, right? You can take that off the table and we can continue working on option 1 as a discussion scenario.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was wondering. I was looking for a 4th option, I guess, but that's fine. So just generally speaking, you know, this happened the last time too, and the concern over the land use, the complexity of the modeling and the thought process that goes into it, all these things we all know. And I will say though, you know, and I do want to commend Zach and James and the rest of the team. It is very complex and difficult, and you are doing the best you can. But I'll say that you've also worked with each one of our staff. And so to any comments about, you know, I'm certainly not an expert on this. I don't think any of us are, but our staff are pretty well versed on this. And so SACOG staff has been meeting with all of our respective staff. We're seeing the results of that modeling, and I know there's a lot of consternation about it, but I just want to emphasize that point is that we have your respective staff are looking at the details. And so I'd encourage all of us to go back and talk to our respective staff and then maybe have them be that conduit for any of our concerns to work with SACOG staff and see if that can remedy. The other thing I want to make is this is just aspirational. This is a legal requirement of ours, of which if we don't meet it, none of us are going to be eligible, right, for federal funds for our road projects. So we're given the time constraint. You know, I feel like that movie, The Jerk, where you're everything, you know, between this line and this space. I mean, we're constrained by the margins in which we're play with. As we talked about, EVs aren't going to give us much help in here. We're constrained by time, and frankly, we're constrained by our crystal ball because, you know, if we sat alongside Zach, any single one of us, I think we'll all come to different conclusions, you know. And so my point is, we may not like everything that we see, but I really implore all of us to seek that compromise sooner than later, and know that no plan, no development project is going to get upheld by this plan. And I think most of us, you know, work in development. No financing is going to be solely dependent upon this plan. It's still going to be your entitlements. It's still going to be your design and grading permits. You know, those are really tangible things that our financiers of these projects are going to be seeking. It isn't just this plan. And I know this plan will, you know, creates a good talking point, if you will, but our community, our region has been developing they adopted the first blueprint in 2004. We've continued to build our communities out, regardless of where any of us were in any of those previous plans. So I know it's important, and I know it, you know, to Director Frost's point, it can affect the certain aspects of development, but I'm trying to keep it in perspective on all the many things that we have to consider. It's a legal document. We need federal funding for our road project. We're never going to get to just right on the land use scenarios. So I just want to encourage us to settle on a compromise sooner than later.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I'll just make a quick comment as well. You know, I think we did take on, this last scenario, and Director Hume, you were, just also for your edification, because we did get community feedback about another option that has complete communities. We can all go round and round about what that would ultimately look like and what percentages. And I do think maybe in June, it would be good to go over assumptions again and drill down a little bit on that in terms of exactly what's in the machinations of those assumptions so that people have a better understanding of that. But I mean, from my perspective, and I can go out in either direction with either of these options here. I mean, for me, option one gives more little bites to everybody, and there's more little bites in the whole plan in terms of more groups. Our option that complete communities is really us picking more winners and losers. I mean, there's no other way really around that. I've never been a big command economy person. And so I would prefer to have more little bites so that more people are at the table versus dropping some people out, because we will never satisfy everybody in those back seats over there in terms of which developments are going to be in or which are going to be out. And I know, we might all have ideas of which ones should be in and out, but there's nothing in this plan that will allow for all of them to be in. And so we do have to make a recommendation at some point. But I do think that the first path that came to gives more of those little bites. But again, I could go either way. I want to see what the board thinks. We don't have a quorum anymore to really give you direction which way to go. So I think they both have to.
It was an information item, so we're looking for your feedback.
Yes.
If I may, very quickly, I think I've got some voice left in me. With respect to direction, two things. One, I'm going to ask that my staff get together with your staff very, very quickly. The assumptions that I'm seeing here, the assumptions they're seeing are not what's happening on the ground. They aren't real. And I'll give you an example. I got a note while we're sitting here. Village 7, Lewis Communities, is in the process of putting $70 million of infrastructure in the ground for 3,800 units. In option 3, they're given 1,200 units. And the note I got was, if I need to stop this right now, I need to know. We're not going to throw any more money at this if we're going to be limited to 1,200 units. Another example, Village 5, about 8,000 housing units, 4 million square feet of retail and commercial. It will be our job center. It will be what helps us reduce vehicle miles traveled. Is in the process of annexing into the city of Lincoln. If LAFCO sees that these numbers for Lincoln have all dropped, there's a very good chance that they'll say there's not a need for this annexation yet. Over the next 5 to 10 years, your absorption levels based on option 3 are sufficient, and shove that out. That would harm Lincoln greatly. So we will at this point be opposed to option 3, but I want to get our staffs together and synchronize our numbers and have discussions about this and see how we can move forward the best possible way. Placer County is growing rapidly. And if we're going back to 2010 through 2020 permit numbers, that's not reflective of what's happening on the ground at all. We're doing 900, 1,000 units a year now, not the 200 that are reflected back there. So the sooner we can get together and have those discussions, the better.
And Director Jones.
Director Jones, can I just
I'm gonna-
respond for one sec?
Yeah.
So again, on the discussion scenario, we worked with your staff really closely and, just so everybody has a context, we took 6 months. We had very little time on the option 3, right? So we know that. That's why you're getting letters, Director Gallardo, that kind of come in. So we did the best we could with the direction you gave us in April. And we'll definitely get back with your staff ASAP.
I'd like to be in that meeting as well.
Okay.
I'm going to chime in on the same thing that Paul here is talking about, because our numbers in Placer County were not reflected either on our projects that we've have going on, as well as our building permits have nearly tripled recently. Building is going on like crazy in Placer County. And the other thing too, that concerns me a little bit about the complete communities is right now we're also grappling with the RENA rezone in Placer County, where they are forcing us to rezone parcels within the unincorporated area, which takes completely away from any local planning. I represent a very rural area in Granite Bay. And we have almost 30%, we're bearing almost 30% of the burden of that low-income housing, high-density rezoning. And in Granite Bay, I don't know how many of you have been there, but we have one grocery store, which we don't consider affordable. We have no jobs, we have no transit, and this is gonna put vehicle miles up, your vehicle miles traveled in our area, because now they will have to drive to Folsom or Roseville to shop, and Folsom, Roseville, or downtown to work. So this is completely in contradiction to what we're trying to accomplish here. And in another 5 years, we're gonna be into another housing cycle. You know, we were already at a shortfall. 1,219 units doesn't sound like very many shortfall of affordable housing units in Placer County. But with the development that we have going on, and it's all high-end development, in the next housing cycle, we'll continue to have a shortfall of our low-income housing units. You.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I appreciate Zach and certainly SACOG staff putting together the option 3. I was really interested in seeing the numbers. I think you've heard from everybody here about our questions about, you know, why things ended up the way they did. What I did appreciate out of all of this was that and I'm going to point to Director Kozlowski's comment about how we can turn the dials on different items to get different outcomes that might be best for everyone. And so I suspect that option 1 will probably be the option moving forward, just kind of from what I'm hearing. But I'd be willing to come back in the June meeting and be able to have that discussion and make a decision then, I think. So thank you. And, you know, I know we have some language that's been requested over time, not just recently, but in the last several months. And I don't see that there's anything there that is too out there or too crazy to include, including the fact that to the point made that there are different ways to do this, and that at the end of the day, it is a plan and it's very ambitious, but the idea that it's not a one size fits all, but that, you know, each method in which we have shown today, we can come up with different outcomes.
Thank you. Any other for the road? All right.
I think Chair Saragosa, I think if he's still on, Director Villegas, who was listening and Chair of the Lumen
Oscar,
Committee,
are you
he's
still here?
there. He's trying to jump between CTC items, but maybe he's not.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You just speak? I think I heard you.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can hear him barely.
Barely? Okay. Hold on a second. You know what? Is that any better? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think, you know, we're at a point, obviously, given what staff has already said in terms of the framework, our kind of responsibilities to put together something that gets us closer to the goal line. You know, in the interest of time, I would recommend that we at least move forward with option 1 as a backstop in the event that the discussion today doesn't result in a scenario that everybody can agree with. I would also recommend that we commit to moving forward over the course of the next 4 years, when we could take a look again at the plan to see who has moved the dial in areas that make it, you know, make projects more reasonable to fit into the plan. That we commit to looking at those areas that have been identified over the course of the last several meetings that are challenging. Some, you know, are our own respective local municipalities that challenge these projects to move forward. And I would recommend that we figure out what mechanism we can, as a SACOG region, although we don't dictate land use authority, we could at least inspire the interest in looking at what are those areas that are holding us back from being able to move within our own respective jurisdictions, if in fact there are things that we need to work on. So, so with that, I would suggest, I think somebody try to at least motion or move forward that we at least push forward option 1 at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director. Okay, anything else? Staff, you've gotten a lot of feedback. A lot, yes, a lot to consider. Obviously, we are well past our time, so we're gonna go ahead and table the rest of the items that we have, including James's performance evaluation, probably to the August meeting. And with that,